Clara Whitmore knelt in the mud of Silver Bend and gathered her broken trunk with her bare hands, while 40 people watched her do it. The man who had paid her fare stood dry on the boardwalk above her, and he said it loud enough for the whole street to hear. "I sent for a wife, not 2 of her." Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Then boots came down off the far walk, slow, heavy, unhurried, and a shadow fell across her hands. If you believe a person's worth ain't measured by the folks who threw them away, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The stage came into Silver Bend, Colorado at 4 in the afternoon on the 14th of July, 1884, 3 days late and covered in white dust. And Clara Whitmore had spent every one of those 3 days practicing what she would say. She had it down to 11 words. "Mr. Pruitt, I'm Clara. I'm pleased to finally meet you, sir." She never got to use them. The driver hauled her trunk down off the roof rack and it hit the street corner. First, the lid split. Her things went into the mud. 2 dresses, a wooden spoon. Her mother had carved a tin of dried yarrow and comfrey and willow bark, a Bible with a broken spine, and 1 pair of good shoes she had never worn because she had been saving them for exactly this day. "Sorry, ma'am," the driver said, and he did not sound sorry, and he climbed back up. Clara knelt down in the street. She had been sitting 16 hours with her knees against a stranger's knees and her spine against a board. And when she went down into that mud, her legs shook under her, but she went down anyway, and she started picking her life up out of the ruts 1 piece at a time. That was when the boardwalk went quiet. There is a particular quiet a town makes when it decides to watch something. Clara had heard it before. She had heard it in Ellsworth, Kansas when she was 19, and a boy named Peter Hale told his friends what he'd said to her behind the church. And she had heard it at her own father's funeral when the widow Cobb leaned over and whispered that at least the girl wouldn't starve. She knew that quiet the way a rancher knows weather. She kept her head down and kept picking. Boots came to the edge of the walk above her. Good boots. Cleaned that morning. "Are you Whitmore?" She looked up. Harlan Pruitt was a handsome man in the way a well-kept storefront is handsome. 50 years old, silver at the temples, a gold chain across his vest, and a face that had learned exactly how much to smile in front of a congregation. He owned the Mercantile. He owned the freight line. He owned the only water rights on the South Flat, and he was working on the rest. "Yes, sir." Clara got to her feet with her arms full. "Clara Whitmore, I'm sorry about the delay. There was a washout past Pueblo and the stand up straight." She did. He looked at her for a long 5 seconds. He looked at her the way a man looks at a horse he has already decided not to buy, and Clara felt the whole street watching him look. "There's been a mistake," Pruitt said. "Sir, you sent a photograph." "I did, sir. In May." That photograph was a lie. Clara's mouth went dry. "The photograph was taken in April, Mr. Pruitt, in Ellsworth, by Mr. Dennison at the depot. I sat for it same as..." "Sat," Pruitt said, and somebody down the walk laughed, 1 hard bark of a laugh, and that was all it took. The rest of them let go. It came at her from 3 directions. The laughing, the way water comes through a broke levee, not all at once, but all together. 2 men outside the barber shop. A woman with a parasol. A boy of maybe 14 who laughed because the grown men did, and who would not remember doing it in a week. Clara stood there in the mud with her mother's spoon in her hand. "I sent for a wife," Pruitt said over the noise, "and I paid $71 in fare and freight to get one, and what got off that stage?" He lifted a hand toward her palm, up presenting her, "is 2 of the woman I was promised." "Harlan." Somebody said, half a warning, half amusement. No, let's be honest, people. This town's built on honest dealing." Pruitt came down 1 step. "Miss Whitmore, look at me." She looked at him. She had promised herself on the stage that she would not cry in front of him, and she found to her own surprise that she did not want to. Something else was rising in her instead. Something older and steadier and a great deal more dangerous, and she did not yet have a name for it. "I run a business," Pruitt said. "A man in my position, his wife is a sign, hanging over the door. You understand, she tells folks what kind of establishment they're walking into." He smiled at her almost kindly. You'd tell them the wrong thing, honey. I can cook for 30 men, Clara said. I'm sure you can. I can set a bone. I nursed my father 11 months, and I've pulled 2 calves, and I can read and cipher and keep a ledger better than most men in this street, and I did not come 800 miles to be a sign over a door. For 1/2 of a second the smile came off Harlan Pruitt's face, and Clara saw what was under it. Then it came back. Well, he said, that's real spirited. Here's how it'll be. The $71 stands as a debt. You'll work it off. I've got a back room at the store, needs stock moved and floors done, and Mrs. Dunn can find you a cot at the boarding house, $3 a week, which I'll advance you naturally. He turned to go. 4 or 5 months, you'll be square, and then you can go on back to Kansas, or wherever else'll have you. That'd be near a year, Clara said. He kept walking. Mr. Pruitt. Her voice came out louder than she meant, and it carried down the whole street and every head turned. You wrote me 9 letters. Pruitt stopped. You wrote, Clara said, that a man gets to a certain age and finds his house is quiet. You wrote that, in April. You wrote that you'd had a bad winter with your chest, and there wasn't a soul to bring you so much as a cup of water. Her hands were shaking now, both of them, and she gripped the spoon so hard, the handle bit her palm. I sold my mother's ring to answer those letters. I answered every single one, and I put them under my pillow, like a girl of 16, and I sat on that stage for 11 days, thinking about a man who was lonesome. The street had gone dead silent. You could have written me the truth, Clara said. Any day of those 11 days, you could have sent a wire to Pueblo and said don't come. You could have spared me this. Harlan Pruitt turned around. Miss Whitmore, he said pleasantly. Nobody spared you anything your whole life, and that's got nothing to do with me. And he went into his store, and the bell over the door rang, and it was the cheerfulest sound Clara had ever hated. The crowd did not disperse. That was the worst part. They stayed to see what she'd do. Mrs. Alma Dunn came off the church steps with her chin already set. She was 60, narrow as a fence rail, and she ran the Ladies' Aid and the boarding house, and in her own estimation, the moral weather of Silver Bend. You'll want to fix your hair, Mrs. Dunn said. Ma'am, before you shame yourself further. She looked Clara over from the mud on her hem to the loose pin above her ear. There's a great deal of you to be seen, girl, and you've made a public spectacle of every ounce, in front of children. I got off a stage, Clara said quietly. You argued, in the street, with a deacon. He left me standing here. And whose doing is that? Mrs. Dunn's voice went gentle in the way that is much crueler than shouting. Some women are given a burden to carry, and some women are the burden. I'll pray on which you are. Cot's $1.50 a night cash, and I don't feed after 7. She walked off. Clara stood alone in the middle of Silver Bend with her broken trunk and 18 cents. And then from the far side of the street boots. She heard him before anybody else did, because everybody else had already gone back to talking. Slow steps. Not hurried, not heavy on purpose. A man walking the way a man walks when he has nothing to prove to the street he's crossing. The talking stopped in a wave ahead of him. That's Walker, somebody said. Lord, twice in one summer. Clara turned. Howe was tall enough that she had to lift her chin and broad through the shoulders in a way that had been earned rather than eaten, and there was trail dust on him to the knee. Dark hair going a little long. A short beard with gray coming in on the left side of his jaw, only, which she would learn later, was a scar under it. 38 years old and carrying it like 50. He did not look at her hem or her waist or her hair. He looked at her hands. They were still full. The spoon, the Bible, the tin of herbs. And he looked at them for a moment, and then he took his hat off. Nobody in Silver Bend had taken their hat off to Clara Whitmore that day. Ma'am? Sir? Name's Ethan Walker. I run cattle up on Elk Ridge day and a half north. He put the hat back on. You need that trunk mended or you need it hauled. Clara opened her mouth and nothing came out. Both, she said finally. I reckon. He crouched down right there in the mud, one knee in it, ruining a knee of good canvas, and he set the split lid of her trunk against the frame and looked at the hinge, and then he took a folding knife out of his pocket and started working the bent pin straight. The whole street watched a man kneel in the mud for the fat bride. "Walker," one of the men from the barber shop called. "That one's used goods. Pruitt already turned her out." Ethan didn't look up. "Bill," he said. "Yeah. Your mother's still living out on the Vasquez Road." A pause. "She is." "Who set her hip when this buckboard went over in March?" Longer pause. "Doc Merrick." "Doc Merrick was in Denver in March," Ethan said, still working the hinge. "Try again." Nobody said anything. "You were 16 days getting off that ridge with her," said a voice old Tom Rennick from the livery door, 70 years old and bandy-legged. "I mind it, snow to the eaves." 14, Ethan said. He stood up. The trunk lid held. He tested it once, twice, and then he turned to Clara and spoke low so that it was for her and nobody else. And something in Clara's chest went loose and painful when he did it, because it had been a long while since a man had lowered his voice for her instead of raising it. "You got somewhere to sleep tonight, ma'am?" "No, sir." "Money?" 18 cents. "Family back east?" "My father's dead. My mother's dead. There's a cousin in Wichita who'd take me in and remind me of it every morning for 30 years. Ethan nodded slowly, like that was a familiar arithmetic. "I'm not going to offer you charity," he said. "You'd take it wrong, and I'd give it wrong." "That's likely true. So here's a job." He hooked a thumb toward the livery. "I got 1,100 head scattered over 4,000 acres, and haying starts in 9 days. I lost my cook in May. Fella took a job in Leadville for the wages. I need somebody can put 3 meals a day in front of 4 men and keep a house from falling in on itself, and come September work stock. $15 a month and found." Clara stared at him. 15. "It's the going rate." "The going rate for a woman is 8. "The going rate for a woman is whatever a man thinks he can get away with," Ethan said. "It's 15. Somebody on the boardwalk made a noise. "Mr. Walker," Clara said carefully, "I want to be plain with you because I have had a very long day of people not being plain with me. Are you offering me a job, or are you offering me a marriage?" "A job." "You're sure?" "Ma'am, I've been alone on that mountain 11 years, and I intend to die there the same way." He said it flat, no self-pity in it, the way a man reads a brand. "I need a cook. You need 3 meals and a door that locks. That's the whole of it." "And if I say no, then I'll put $4 in your hand for the stage to Pueblo, and you'll never hear from me again, and I'd ask you not to tell folks I did it." Clara looked at him a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why are you doing this in front of the entire town when you could have waited till they were gone?" And for the first time, Ethan Walker's mouth moved not a smile. 1/4. "Because they were watching," he said. Harlan Pruitt came out of the store while Ethan was loading the trunk into the wagon bed. He came out easy hands in his vest, and he stood at the edge of the walk with the bell still swinging behind him. "Walker." "Pruitt." "That woman owes me $71. Ethan set the trunk down flat and pushed it forward against the flour sacks. Then he straightened, and he reached into his coat, and he took out a leather fold, and he counted out bills onto the walk one at a time, slow in front of God and Silver Bend both. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Then a silver dollar on top. 71, Ethan said. "Now that's... count it." "I don't need to count." "Count it," Ethan said, "in front of these people, and then say out loud that Miss Whitmore don't owe you 1 red cent, and then we're done." The street was very quiet. Pruitt counted it. His hands were not quite steady on the last 20, and Clara saw that, and she filed it away because she had spent her whole life reading men's hands. "She don't owe me anything," Pruitt said. Louder. "She does not owe me anything." "Obliged." Ethan turned away. "Walker." Pruitt's voice had changed. It had gotten quieter and much more genuine, And that was the first thing about that afternoon that truly frightened Clara. "You're a long way from the ridge for a man who comes down twice a summer." Needed nails. Funny thing. Assessor was through last month. Pruitt tucked the bills away. "Seems your daddy's old filing on the Elk Ridge water was never properly recorded at the county seat. Just never recorded. 40 years of a family drinking out of a creek nobody ever wrote down." Ethan stopped with one hand on the wagon. "Now it's nothing to me," Pruitt said pleasantly. "I only mention it because I'd hate to see a man lose a thing on paperwork. He could have settled friendly over a drink like neighbors." "I don't drink." "I know it." Pruitt smiled. "That's always been your trouble, son. You don't do anything a man could hold on to." Ethan looked at him for 3 long seconds. Then he put his hand out to Clara. "Ma'am, it's a day and a half up and we lose the light at 8. Clara took his hand. It was hard as a saddle horn, and it was, she noticed, careful. He took her weight without any show of taking it. No grunt, no bracing, nothing that would let the street have one more thing to laugh at. She sat up on that seat with her spine straight and her ruined hem showing and every eye on her. And then Alma Dunn said loud to the woman beside her, "Well, she'll be warming more than his supper by Friday." Clara's face went hot. Ethan set the brake back on. He turned on that seat, and he looked at Mrs. Dunn, and he did not raise his voice at all. Ma'am, your husband's buried up on my east line." Mrs. Dunn's mouth opened. "Died of the pneumonia in '79, and the ground in town was froze 4 foot down, and there wasn't a man in Silver Bend would take a pick to it in January." Ethan's voice stayed level. "I dug that hole. Took me 2 days, and I burned 6 cords of wood thawing it. And when I came down to tell you it was done, you gave me a cup of coffee, and you said you'd never forget it." The street had gone so quiet, Clara could hear the flag rope ticking against the pole in front of the land office. "I ain't asking you to remember it now," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to say one more word about this lady and see what it costs you." Nobody said anything. He let the brake off. They rolled out of Silver Bend at 5:30 in the afternoon, and Clara Whitmore did not look back, and she found she was not crying, and she did not know yet whether that was strength or whether something in her had simply stopped working. He didn't speak for the first hour. She learned later this was not coldness. It was simply that Ethan Walker had spent 11 years in a house where speaking out loud served no purpose, and words had gone stiff in him the way a hinge goes stiff. But at the time she sat there and thought, he's already regretting it. She had a lot of practice at that thought. She could build it very fast out of almost nothing. At the top of the first grade, he pulled up to breathe the horses. "You warm enough?" "It's July." "It's July down there." He nodded up the valley. "Where we're going, July's a rumor after dark. I've got a shawl." He clucked the team on. 20 minutes later, without a word, he shrugged out of his canvas coat and laid it across her lap. "Mr. Walker." "It's on the seat," he said. "What you do with it's your business." Clara sat very still with that coat across her knees. "May I ask you something?" she said. "You may. Back there, you said you'd been alone 11 years and you meant to stay that way." She turned to look at him. "You said it like a man reading off a fact, but you said it fast." Ethan's jaw moved. "That ain't a question, ma'am." "No," Clara agreed. "I suppose it ain't." They went 2 more miles. "There was a woman," he said. "You don't have to be Rose." His eyes stayed on the team. "And a boy, Micah. He was 4. Clara's hands closed on the coat. "We were coming back from Denver in October of '73. Wagon 2 horses, one of 'em green." Nothing in his voice moved at all, and that was somehow the worst of it. "There's a stretch on the Fairplay Road where the shoulder washes and don't look like it's washed. I was walking at the head because of the green horse. Rose had the lines." "Mr. Walker." "They went over on the outside of the turn," he said, "and I was 11 feet away, and I have thought about them 11 feet every day for 11 years, and I have never once got there in time." The wagon rolled. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "That's a poor word for it, but I'm sorry." How long did folks in town leave you be after?" For the first time he glanced at her, A short, hard, surprised look, like she had reached over and put a hand exactly on a bruise he hadn't told anybody about. "How'd you know to ask that?" "Because I buried my father in Ellsworth in March of '81, Clara said, "and by June there wasn't a soul would sit in the pew with me. Grief makes people uneasy, and folks'll forgive you almost anything except making them uneasy." Ethan Walker looked at her a long moment. Then he faced front. "6 weeks, he said. Then they got tired of it. Started saying I was strange. Then they started saying I was hard. Then Pruitt started saying I was dangerous on account of I wouldn't sell." "Are you dangerous?" "To some men. To me." The team went 8 steps. "Ma'am," Ethan said, "you'll be able to answer that yourself by sundown tomorrow, and you won't need to take my word for it. Which is how it ought to be." They camped that night below the timber, and he built the fire, and then walked 20 yards off and made his own bed on the other side of it without being asked. And Clara lay awake listening to the wind come down off the peaks and thought about how her hands had shaken in the street and hadn't shaken since. In the morning he had coffee going before she woke. "You cook," he said. "I was told I do." "By who?" 42 threshing men in Rice County, Kansas, who ate my biscuits 11 summers running and never left one on the plate. "Huh." He handed her the cup first. "Then I hired right." The second day was harder. The road stopped being a road at noon and became 2 ruts, and then 1 rut, and then a scar going up through the aspens. Twice she got down and walked because the grade was too much on the team, and she was breathing hard, and she was very aware of being breathless in front of him, and she waited for the look. It didn't come. What came instead was, "Take the near horse's head at the switchback, would you? He crowds the inside." And she did. And he said good, and nothing else. And Clara Whitmore walked the next half mile with her hand on a horse's cheek strap and her eyes stinging, and could not have explained to a living soul why. The storm came at 4 in the afternoon, an hour below the ridge. She would find out later that this was the ordinary way of it, that mountain summers build their weather in the morning and throw it in the afternoon, and that a man on Elk Ridge learns to read the anvil top of a cloud the way other men read a clock. But she didn't know it yet, and when the sky went the color of a bad bruise, she said, "Is that rain?" "That's hail," Ethan said, and stood up in the box. Yeah. The team went from a walk to a trot to a run. The first stones hit them at the ford of Bitter Creek, and they were the size of pennies, then the size of walnuts, and they came down so hard on the wagon boards it sounded like a man beating a drum with both fists. The near horse screamed and went sideways in the water. "He'll go over," Clara shouted. "Stay in the box." She did not stay in the box. She was over the wheel and into that creek before she decided to be water to her thighs, and then to her waist, and cold enough to stop her heart. And she got her hand on the cheek strap, the same way she had at the switchback, and she put her whole considerable weight against a 1,500-pound animal's shoulder and shoved. "Walk on!" she roared at him. "Walk on, you great fool!" The horse walked on. The wagon came up out of the ford. Ethan hauled the brake at the top of the bank and was down and around and had her by both arms. "Are you hit? Look at me. Are you hit?" "I'm fine." "You're bleeding at the ear." "That's hail. That's nothing is the wheel." "Damn the wheel," Ethan Walker said, and it was the first time she ever heard him raise his voice, and it was not at her, it was at the sky, at the creek, at 11 years and 11 feet. "Get up in the box, now." They ran the last mile with the hail turning to rain, and the rain turning to that thin, needling cold that comes off snowfields in July. And by the time the cabin came up out of the trees, Clara Whitmore could not feel her hands. He got the door open with his shoulder and put her inside and went back out for the team. And when he came back, 8 minutes later, she was standing exactly where he'd left her, dripping arms wrapped around herself, shaking so hard her teeth were going. Ethan took one look at her and crossed the room and pulled a wool blanket off the shelf. "Take off everything." Clara went absolutely still. The shaking didn't stop, but everything else in her did the way a rabbit stops in open ground. She looked at the door. She looked at the man between her and the door. She was 31 hours from the nearest town on a mountain in a one-room cabin with a stranger, and she had 18 cents, and the whole street in Silver Bend had already told her exactly what she was and exactly what she'd be doing by Friday. Her voice came out very small and very steady. "Mr. Walker, I want you to understand that I will fight you." Ethan Walker stopped where he stood, and she watched a thing happen on that man's face that she would remember for the rest of her life. She watched him understand what he had just said and how it had landed, and she watched it go through him like a bullet. He put the blanket down on the table. He backed up 3 steps all the way to the far wall, and he took the rifle down off its pegs, and Clara's breath stopped. He set it on the floor, muzzle to the wall, and he slid it across the boards toward her feet. "There's the only gun in this house," he said. "Mr. Walker." "There's the only gun in this house," he said again louder. "And it's loaded, and now it's yours, and I'd rather you had it than me." Then he went to the door. He took the key out of the inside lock. He crossed back, not close, not within 6 feet, and he set the key on the corner of the table. "Door bolts from the inside. That's the only key. I'm going to the barn." He pulled his hat down. "There's dry clothes of mine in the chest. They'll swim on you, and I don't care. There's the blanket. The stove's laid and the matches are in the tin. Fire'll take 4 minutes." "Mr. Walker, I said it wrong." His hand was on the latch, and he wasn't looking at her. "I've said everything wrong for 11 years, ma'am. And mostly it don't cost anybody anything, because there ain't anybody up here. What I meant was your clothes are soaked through, and it's 41 degrees, and I've buried a man who came off this ridge wet in August." His jaw worked. "I meant you're freezing, and I can't help you, and I need to leave the room. That's what I meant. That's all I ever meant." "I know," Clara whispered. "You didn't a second ago." "No," she admitted. "I didn't." "Then I earned that," Ethan said, "and I'll wear it." He opened the door onto the rain. "Mr. Walker?" He stopped. "It's coming down in sheets out there," Clara said. "The barn's 40 yards. I've slept worse." "That's not—" She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes hard. "That is not what I meant either. Nobody in this world says what they mean, do they?" "Not often, ma'am." "Then let me try." She lowered her hand. 6 years ago, a man in Ellsworth put his hand on my back in a barn and told me that a woman shaped like me ought to be grateful. And I've carried that into every room I've walked into since, and I carried it into this one, and it wasn't yours to carry. So I'm setting it down." Her voice cracked once, and she kept going anyway. "You'll get soaked to the skin walking to that barn, and you'll do it because of a thing a stranger did to me in 1878. And I don't want that. I want you to go, and I want you to know that I know why you're going, and I want you to know it ain't because I think you're him." Ethan Walker stood in the doorway with the rain coming off the eave behind him. "Bolt it," he said quietly. "Please." And he pulled the door shut. She bolted it. Then she stood with her back against it for a full minute, shaking, and then she got the fire lit 4 minutes exactly as he'd said, and she peeled off 11 pounds of wet wool and stood in front of that stove, wrapped in a blanket in a stranger's house, 800 miles from anywhere. The cabin was 1 room and a loft, clean, swept. A table with 2 chairs, and one of the chairs had dust on the seat and the other didn't. There was a shelf over the stove with a woman's blue enamel coffee pot on it, put up high out of use and not thrown away. There was a door frame by the wood box with pencil marks on it and dates, and the highest one said Micah, 4YR AUG 1873, and there wasn't a mark above it, and there never would be. Clara Whitmore sat down on the hearthstone and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry for herself. She'd already decided not to do that in a street in front of 40 people, and she wasn't going back on it now. She cried for the pencil marks. At 6 o'clock she got up. She put on his clothes, a wool shirt she had to roll 4 turns at the cuff and trousers she couldn't fasten and belted with a length of harness leather, and she looked ridiculous, and there was no one to see it. And that was, she thought, very nearly a kind of freedom. She found flour. She found lard salt soda, a crock of buttermilk in the cold box, and a side of bacon and coffee, and a sack of beans that had gone hard. She made 12 biscuits, and a skillet of gravy, and a pot of coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe. Then she unbolted the door and walked 40 yards through the rain in a man's shirt with a dish towel over the plate. The barn door was cracked. He was sitting on an upturned bucket in the dark, with his arms on his knees doing nothing at all in the way of a man who has been doing nothing at all for a very long time. He came up off that bucket fast when he saw her. "Ma'am, sit down, Mr. Walker. You shouldn't be out in—" "Sit down." He sat down. Clara set the plate on the workbench and took the towel off it. "There's 12, she said. "You'll eat 4 now, and I'll not hear otherwise." He looked at the biscuits. Then he looked at her. "You lit the stove." "I did." "You been in that kitchen an hour and a half." "An hour and 40 minutes. Ethan Walker picked up a biscuit, and he held it in his hand, and Clara watched a 38-year-old man look at a hot biscuit like it was a thing he'd been told about once, secondhand years ago. "There ain't been anybody cook in that house since '73, he said. "I know," Clara said. "I saw the pot on the shelf." His hand tightened. "I didn't touch it," she said quickly. "It's not mine to touch. It'll stay right where it is, Mr. Walker, till the day you take it down yourself, and if that day never comes, then it never comes." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he ate. He ate 4 biscuits and half the gravy standing at a workbench in a barn, and when he was done, he set the plate down and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and said in a voice that had gone rough somewhere in the middle of it, 15 was wrong. "Sir. Wages." He cleared his throat. "It's 20. "Mr. Walker, that's more than a top hand makes." "Then I reckon I hired one," he said. Clara Whitmore stood in a barn on Elk Ridge in the rain, in a man's shirt with harness leather for a belt, and something happened in her chest that she had no name for and no defense against. "I'd like to say something," she said, "and then I'll go in and I'll not say it again." "Say it." "Yesterday morning I was a debt," Clara said. "By supper time I was a joke. 2 days now I have been a thing people got to decide what to do with." She lifted her chin. "And this evening a man told me I was worth $20 a month and gave me the only key to his own house. So whatever else happens up on this mountain, and I expect a great deal will, because I have never in my life had a run of good fortune. Last past Thursday, I want it down on this record that on the 15th of July, 1884, somebody finally counted. Ethan took his hat off. In the barn. In front of nobody. "Ma'am," he said, "far as I can see there wasn't a thing wrong with the count. It's just that everybody down there was reading the wrong figure off the wrong ledger." He walked her back to the house through the rain with his hand near her elbow and never once touching it. At the door she stopped. "Mr. Walker, that green horse, the one from '73. His hand went still on the latch. "Did you shoot him after?" "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Ethan Walker looked out into the dark at 11 years of mountain. "Because he was scared," he said, "and it wasn't his fault what he was, and there wasn't anybody else on that road to say so." He touched the brim of his hat. "Bolt the door, Miss Whitmore." She bolted it. And on the other side of 2 inches of pine in the rain. A man stood there a moment longer than he needed to, and inside with her palm flat against the wood and her heart going like a hammer, so did she. She didn't sleep. She lay in the loft with the rifle beside her like a sensible woman and stared at the underside of the roof boards and listened to rain. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, she stopped listening for a hand on the latch and started listening for something else entirely, and she could not have said what. At first light, she came down and drew the bolt and opened the door, and Ethan Walker was sitting against the barn door with his hat over his face and his arms folded and his coat soaked black to the shoulders. "Mr. Walker?" He came awake all at once the way men do who have slept outdoors most of their lives. "Ma'am?" "You sat out here all night." "I sat out here part of the night." "Which part?" "The wet part," he said, and got up, and his knees cracked audibly, and he pretended they hadn't. "There is a loft," Clara said, "and a floor and a stove." "There's 4 men coming up that trail at 6 o'clock, Ethan said, "and they'll ride past this house, and they'll see what there is to see, and what there is to see is a man walking out of his own barn." He set his hat straight. "That's all. That's the whole of my thinking on it, and I'd take it kindly if you didn't make me say it twice. Clara stood in the doorway a moment. "Coffee's on," she said. They came at 6:04, and she heard them before she saw them, and the talk stopped 40 yards out, the same way the talk had stopped in Silver Bend. Silas Bright came in first. He was 52 years old, and he had been on Elk Ridge since Ethan's father held it, and he had a face like a boot that had been rained on and dried in the sun 100 times. "Ma'am." "Sir." "Silas Bright, foreman." He looked at the table. 24 biscuits, a kettle of gravy, a pan of bacon, and coffee. He looked at it a good while. "Huh." Behind him came Jubal Cortez, who took his hat off and held it against his chest and said, "Señora," like a man at a church door. Behind Jubal came Ned Bailey, 17, who went red to the ears and said nothing at all and sat down and put both hands flat on the table like he'd been told to. And behind Ned came Deke Rawls. Deke was 30 and handsome in a cheap way, and he had been in town 2 days before, and Clara knew it the second he came through the door because he did not look at the biscuits. He looked at her. "Well," Deke said, "so it's true." "Rawls," Silas said, "I'm only saying it's true. Fella comes down for nails and comes back with—" "A cook," Ethan said from the doorway. The room got quiet. "Sure," Deke said. "A cook. 20 a month and found," Ethan said. "Same as I'd pay a man, and more than I pay you, and if that don't sit right, there's a horse in the corral and a road out." Deke's jaw worked. He sat down. Clara set the coffee in front of him first, which surprised everybody at that table, including herself. "Mr. Rawls." "Ma'am." "You'll want to eat," she said. "You've got a long day of being wrong ahead of you." Jubal Cortez made a noise into his cup. Ned Bailey laughed out loud and then looked horrified. Silas Bright's face did not move at all except at one corner, and that was the corner Clara watched, and that was the one that told her she would be all right. They ate 19 of the 24 biscuits. Silas stayed back after the others went out to the corral, turning his hat in his hands. "Boss?" "Say it." "Town's talking." "Town's always talking. Not like this." Silas glanced at Clara and then decided visibly that a woman who was going to be there was a woman who was going to hear it. "Pruitt saying you took her, saying he'd paid the fare, and you snatched her off the street in front of witnesses and hauled her up a mountain, and Alma Dunn's got the church ladies saying prayers over it." "He was paid," Ethan said, "in front of the whole street." "Ain't about the money." "No," Ethan agreed. "It never is. He's building something, boss. Man don't hand you a threat about a 40-year-old water filing on a Tuesday afternoon unless he's already got the rest of it stacked." "I know it. So what do you aim to do?" "Put up hay," Ethan said. Silas looked at him a long moment. Then he put his hat on and went out, and Clara heard him say something to Jubal in the yard, and she heard Jubal laugh, and she stood there with a dish towel in her hands, understanding for the first time that she had not walked into a quiet life. She had walked into the middle of a war that had been going on for years, and she'd arrived in the second act, and nobody had thought to hand her a program. She washed the plates. Then she found the ledger. It was on the shelf under the window, and it was a good ledger, well kept, every head of cattle and every sack of flour in a hand that was small and cramped and slow, the hand of a man who could write but did not enjoy it. She read 40 pages standing up. Then she sat down and read 100 more. When Ethan came in at noon, she was still there with a pencil behind her ear and 4 years of numbers spread across the table, and she did not say hello. "Mr. Walker, what does a beef bring at the railhead in Pueblo?" He stopped in the doorway. "Depends on the year." 82. 28.30 a head. "And what did you get?" "I don't ship to Pueblo. I sell local. Pruitt's contract, he freights 'em down." "I know he does," Clara said. "I'm asking what you got." Ethan came over and looked at the page she was pointing at, and he looked at it the way a man looks at a snake in a woodpile. 21 and a quarter. 21 and a quarter, Clara said. "In a year the Denver papers had it at 29. And in 83 you got 22 even. And in 84 he's paying you 21.50 and telling you the market's soft." She turned the ledger around. Mr. Walker, over 4 years that man has taken something north of $6,000 off this ranch, and he has done it 3 cents at a time, so you'd never feel the cut." Ethan didn't say anything. "I'm not saying it to shame you. You ain't shaming me." "I am a little," Clara said, "and I'd rather do it at this table than let him do it at the county seat." Ethan pulled the other chair out, the one with dust on the seat. The one nobody had sat in since 1873, and he wiped it once with his sleeve and sat down in it, and Clara made herself keep breathing. "Say the rest." "He's not trying to take your water because he wants your water," she said. "He's got water. He's trying to take it because a man who's been quietly robbing you for 4 years cannot afford for you to ever find out. If he owns the creek, he owns you, and if he owns you, you never look at a market report as long as you live." "Huh? That's all you've got? Huh?" Ethan Walker looked at the ledger and then at her, and he said, "I hired a cook." "You did?" "I got a bookkeeper." "You got both," Clara said, "and you're paying $20 for it, and I'd call that the best trade you've made since '81. And Ethan Walker laughed. It was not much of a laugh. It came out of him like something rusted turning over one short sound, and it clearly startled him, worse than it startled her, and he stopped it immediately and looked at the table. "Been a while since I done that," he said. "I noticed." "Don't make a thing of it." "I won't," Clara said, and made a private, permanent, entirely unreasonable vow to make him do it again before the summer was out. Haying started on the 23rd. She was up at 4 and had breakfast on at 5 and dinner packed by 7, and she drove the water barrel out to the meadow at 10 and again at 2. And by the 3rd day, she had learned to back a wagon through a gate without anyone telling her how, mostly by doing it wrong in front of Deke Rawls twice and refusing to do it wrong a 3rd time. "You're leaning on that near horse," Deke said. "He crowds the inside." "He crowds because you let him." "He crowds," Clara said, "because he was broke by somebody in a hurry, and I ain't in a hurry, and if you'd like to demonstrate, I'll gladly hold your hat." Jubal said something in Spanish that made Ned choke on his water. "What did he say?" "He said the horse likes you better," Ned managed. "What did he really say?" "He said the horse has better judgment than Deke." Clara handed Ned the dipper. "Mr. Cortez," she called across the meadow, "you'll get an extra biscuit." "Si, señora." That was the 4th day, and it was the last good day for a while, because on the 5th day, the mower took Ned Bailey's leg open from the knee to the ankle. She heard the yelling before she saw anything. She had the water barrel half unloaded, and she heard Silas Bright roar a word she had never heard a man use in daylight, and she was running before she'd decided to run, and running was not a thing. Clara Whitmore did well or gracefully or without cost, and she did not care. They had him on his back in the cut hay. Jubal had his shoulders. The boy was white as a plate, and his mouth was open, and no sound was coming out, which frightened her more than screaming would have. Sicklebar caught him when the team lurched. "Move," Clara said. "Ma'am, you don't want to see—" "Move," she said. And Silas Bright, who had been giving orders on that mountain for 20 years, moved. She got her hands on it. It was bad. It was bad in the particular way that means a man has about 11 minutes, and every one of them matters. And she heard her own voice come out flat and strange and very calm. "Belt. Somebody's belt now." Deke Rawls was out of his before she finished the word. "Above the knee. Tight. Tighter than you think. I don't care if he screams. If he's screaming, he's breathing." She had the boy's trouser leg open. "Mr. Bright, I need the whiskey out of the barn. There's a bottle behind the harness pegs." "Boss don't keep." "There is a bottle behind the harness pegs," Clara said. "And it is for exactly this, and it has been sitting there 11 years waiting for today, so run." He ran. "Mr. Cortez, my satchel's in the wagon, brown leather, and there's a tin in it. Yarrow, it looks like weeds bring the whole thing. Mr. Rawls." "Ma'am." "Sit on his other side and hold his hand and let him break your fingers." Deke Rawls sat down in the hay and put his hand in the boy's hand and said in a voice nobody on that ranch had ever heard him use, "I got you, Neddy. I got you, kid. She's got you." Ethan came at a dead run from the far fence and pulled up short over the top of them, and Clara did not even look up. "Don't," she said. "I ain't said—" "You're about to ask if he'll keep the leg, and I don't know yet, and I need my hands steady, so don't." Ethan Walker knelt down in the hay and shut his mouth. It took her 40 minutes. She cleaned it, and she poured whiskey into it, and Ned Bailey screamed himself hoarse, and then stopped screaming, which was worse, and she slapped his cheek and said, "Stay here, boy. Look at me. Tell me your mother's name." And he said, "Ruth," and she said, "Good. Tell me again in a minute," and she stitched him with silk thread from her own sewing tin, and a needle she'd held in a match flame, 29 stitches, and she packed it with yarrow and bound it with a strip of her second-best dress. Then she sat back on her heels, and her hands started to shake, and she put them under her arms so nobody would see. "He'll keep it," she said, "if it don't go bad. And it'll go bad if he moves off that cot for 2 weeks, and he will try because he's 17 and stupid, so somebody's going to have to sit on him." "I'll sit on him," Deke said. Silas Bright took his hat off. He did it without any ceremony, standing in a hayfield with a bottle in his hand, and he held it against his chest, and he said, "Ma'am, I want to say something, and I want to say it in front of these men." "You don't—" "I said to the boss on the 14th of this month that he'd made a fool of himself in the street." Silas's jaw set. "I said it twice, and I'd like it on the record that Silas Bright was wrong, and that he'll be glad to be wrong out loud any day of the week to anybody who asks." "Mr. Bright, there's 4 men on this ridge," Silas said, "and one of 'em would be dead in that hay right now if you'd stayed in Kansas." Nobody said anything for a while after that. They carried Ned up to the house on a hay rack and put him in the loft, and Clara gave up the loft and took a pallet by the stove and would not hear a word about it, and Ethan gave up the barn and slept in the lean-to off the tack room and would not hear a word about that either. And at 11 o'clock that night she came out with coffee and found him sitting on the chopping block doing nothing at all, which she was learning was the only kind of resting he knew. "He's asleep. Fever. Some. Not the bad kind yet." She sat down on the woodpile, which was not a ladylike thing to do, and she was too tired to care. "You knew about the whiskey," Ethan said. "I found it my second day. You went through my barn. I went through your barn, your kitchen, your cold box, and your ledger," Clara said. "I'd have gone through your pockets if you'd left them lying about. Mr. Walker, I have been thrown out of one place in my life with 18 cents in my hand, and I have promised myself I will never again be somewhere I don't know where things are kept." Ethan turned that over. "That's fair," he said. "You're not angry?" "No. Most men would be." "Most men," Ethan said, "ain't been sitting on a mountain 11 years with a bottle behind the harness pegs that nobody ever needed till today." Clara looked at him. "Why'd you keep it?" "You don't drink. Rose put it there." He said the name flat and even, and it still cost him something. She watched it cost him. "Fall of 72. She said a house with children in it needs a bottle for wounds and a bottle for grief, and she'd not have the second one in her kitchen, so she put the one out there." He rubbed his thumb along his knuckle. "I never moved it. Didn't seem like my business to." "Mr. Walker." That woman saved Ned Bailey's leg tonight," Clara said. "You understand that 11 years ago a woman you loved put a bottle behind some pegs because she was thinking about a boy she hadn't had yet getting cut on something. And tonight, that bottle came out." Ethan Walker did not say anything for a long, long time. Then he stood up and walked off maybe 15 feet with his back to her, and stood there, and Clara had the sense, the way you can sometimes feel weather coming through a wall, that a man was crying without making one single sound, and that he would rather have been shot than have her know it. So she looked at the stars and drank her coffee and said nothing at all. When he came back, his voice was ordinary. "There's pencil marks on that door frame." "I saw them." "You didn't ask." "No, sir." "Why not?" "Because you'd have told me when it was time," Clara said. "And it wasn't, and I've had plenty of people go rooting in my sore places for entertainment, and I didn't care for it." Ethan sat back down on the chopping block. "Micah," he said, 4 years old. He liked the horses better than he liked people, and he'd talk your ear off about which one was mad at which other one, and he had a stutter on his W's, and I used to say Whiskey Willow Weather just to hear him try it, and Rose said I was cruel, and she'd laugh so hard she'd have to sit down. What color was his hair? Ma'am. Nobody ever asks the small ones, Clara said. Everyone asks how they died. Nobody asks what color their hair was. Ethan's breath went out of him. Red, he said. Not her side and not mine. Just red. Out of nowhere. Her mother's father, we reckoned. Folks used to stop us in the street over it. Red, Clara repeated. Well, then I know something about him now. And that was the night, though neither of them said a word about it, and both of them knew it, that Clara Whitmore stopped being a cook on Elk Ridge. The writer came 4 days later. How was a clerk from the county seat in a bad hat, and he'd been sent up with a paper, and he clearly did not want to be there, and he read it out loud in the yard, because that was his instruction, with Silas and Jubal and Deke standing behind him, and Clara in the doorway, with a wooden spoon in her hand. The substance of it was 7 sentences long, and it took the ground out from under everything. The Walker filing on Bitter Creek, the original entry made by Josiah Walker in 1849, and recorded allegedly at the territorial office before there was a county at all, did not exist in the county book. A competing claim on the same water had been entered on the 6th of July by one Harlan G. Pruitt. Under the law, the earlier filing prevailed, but the earlier filing had to be produced. The holder had 60 days from service to bring the original document or a certified copy to the county seat. 60 days from the 29th of July. That's the 27th of September, Clara said. Yes, ma'am. And if he can't produce it, then the creek goes to the recorded claimant, ma'am, and, the clerk swallowed, and any use of the water thereafter would be at that claimant's discretion. Deke Rawls said something that made the clerk flinch. He can't do that. Ned called down from the loft window, 17 years old, and full of fever and certainty. That's Walker water. That's been Walker water since before there was a town. Ned, Silas said. It's ours. Ned. The clerk left. Nobody watched him go. 1,100 head, Jubal said quietly, and 1 creek. 2 springs on the north bench, Silas said. 2 springs that go dry in August, and you know they do. Ethan hadn't said a word. He was standing in the middle of his own yard, looking at the ground, and Clara watched him and understood with a cold drop in her stomach that he was not thinking about cattle. Mr. Walker. Ma'am. Do you have the filing? He didn't answer. Ethan. It was the first time she'd used it. Everybody heard her do it. Do you have your father's papers? Yes. Then where are they? And Ethan Walker looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on him and would only see twice more in her life, and he said, in her trunk. Nobody had to ask whose. He walked out to the horse pasture and stood at the fence a long while, and Silas Bright took his hat off and rubbed his head and said half to himself, 11 years. He's never opened it. Ma'am, that trunk come off the wagon at the bottom of the Fairplay Road with the rest of it, and he hauled it up here on his own back, and he set it in that lean-to, and I have been on this ranch every working day since, and I have never once seen it moved. Silas put his hat on. There's a man had put his hand in a fire before he'd put it on that latch. Then somebody had better do it for him. Ma'am. Silas caught her arm, not hard, but he caught it. I'd think on that. I'm thinking. Think harder. That's the last of her in this world. He'll open it in his own time or he won't, and if he don't, we'll figure something, but ain't nobody on God's ridge got the right to lift that lid but him. Clara stood very still. You're right, she said. I know I am. I don't like it. Ain't a thing on this mountain to like this week, Silas said. They went to town on the 2nd of August for supplies and for the mail, and because Clara Whitmore had decided privately, without telling one living soul, least of all Ethan Walker, that she was going to look Harlan Pruitt in the face while she still had the nerve. They rode in at 10 in the morning, and the street did what the street had done before, which was stop. Old Tom Rennick came out of the livery and crossed to the wagon and put his hand up to her. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Rennick. Heard about the Bailey boy. Word travels. Word travels when Deke Rawls comes down for a bottle of liniment and tells it 9 times, Tom said. Ma'am, that's Ruth Bailey's youngest, and Ruth Bailey does washing for half this street, and she has cried on 4 porches this week, saying a woman on Elk Ridge saved her boy's leg with a sewing needle. His chin came up, and he said it loud enough to carry. That's what's being said now, in case you'd been told different. Clara had to look at the floorboards of the wagon for a second. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I ain't done nothing but say a true thing in the open, which around here they've made into a whole act of courage. Alma Dunn was standing outside the mercantile. Clara got down. She had planned nothing, and she walked straight up to her, and the whole street watched. Mrs. Dunn. Miss Whitmore. How's your knee? Mrs. Dunn blinked. I beg your pardon. Your left knee. You came off the church steps toward me on the 14th of July, and you took them one at a time, and you put your right foot down twice. Clara said it without any heat at all. It's water on the joint. Comes on in a wet summer worse at night, and it'll keep you awake and make you mean by morning. I'd guess you've been telling folks it's nothing for about 2 years. The color came up Alma Dunn's throat. That is not. Willow bark and comfrey twice a day, and keep it up on a stool of an evening, Clara said. It won't cure it. It'll let you sleep. She held out a paper twist of the herb, and when the old woman didn't take it, she set it on the barrel top beside her. There. Now, ma'am, you may go on and say whatever you like about me, and I expect you will, and I'll not answer it. But you'll do it sleeping. She turned to go. Why? Alma Dunn said. Ma'am, you know exactly what I said about you in this street. Her voice had gone unsteady. In front of the aide, in front of the reverend. Why would you? Because a knee doesn't care who it's attached to, Clara said. And because my mother taught me the medicine, and she'd rise up out of the ground if I used it as a weapon, and because, and here her voice did move just a little, because I have spent my whole life being what people decided I was, ma'am, and I have found I would rather be a nuisance to them than a mirror. She went into the mercantile because they needed salt and coffee and nails, and Harlan Pruitt was waiting for her at the back counter, and she had known he would be, and she went anyway. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Pruitt. 10 pounds of a sack of coffee, and 5 pounds of 8-penny nails. Certainly. He didn't move. You look well. I look the same. No, Pruitt said, you don't, and that's the interesting part. He leaned on the counter with both hands, and his voice came down to a level that did not carry past the flour barrels. Sit down a minute. There's a stool. I'll stand. $200. Clara didn't move. $200 cash today, Pruitt said, and a first-class ticket east from Pueblo, and a letter of character from a deacon of the Silver Bend Methodist Church that says you were done a wrong in this street and bore it like a Christian. That's a great deal more than you came here with, and considerably more than you'll leave with in September. In exchange for what? A statement. He said it as lightly as a man ordering dinner. Before the county judge, that Ethan Walker took you out of this town against your inclination, and that you have been kept in that house on that mountain in a condition no decent woman would choose. That's a lie. It's a statement, Pruitt said. The judge don't weigh 'em. He writes 'em down. And with it, you'd have a warrant and a scandal and a man too busy in court in September to bring anybody's papers to the county seat. Harlan Pruitt smiled, and for one instant, Clara saw a flicker of something almost like respect, and it was the single most frightening thing that had happened to her in Colorado. You are wasted on that mountain, he said. I'll take the salt and the coffee and the nails. Miss Whitmore, Clara. He straightened. I'll say the other part since you've made me. You think that man saved you in this street. He didn't. He used you. Ethan Walker doesn't do a kindness in front of 40 witnesses by accident. He did it because it cost me something, and he'd have done it for a stray dog if the dog had been standing in the right spot at the right hour. Is that all? No. Pruitt's voice went gentle. Ask him about Hannah Reese. Clara's stomach dropped, and she kept her face absolutely still. 2 years ago this September, Pruitt said. Came out on the stage from Missouri sent for, went up that road with him just like you did. 12 days later, she was on the eastbound out of Pueblo in the middle of the night, and nobody in this town ever saw her again, and he has never once said a word about it to me or to the Reverend or to a living soul. He nodded slowly. 12 days, Miss Whitmore. You're on 19. I only mention it because I'd hate for you to find out on a mountain in the dark. She paid for the salt and the coffee and the nails. She counted the change. She carried it out herself, and she would not let Ethan take the sack from her hands, and they were 4 miles out of Silver Bend before she trusted her voice. Who is Hannah Reese? The wagon kept rolling for a beat too long. He told you that. He did. What did he tell you? That she went up this road with you in September of '84 and came down it 12 days later in the middle of the night and was never heard of again, Clara said. And that you have never spoken her name to anybody. And I would like you to understand, Mr. Walker, that I did not believe one syllable of what he was implying, and that I am asking anyway, and I'd be obliged if you'd not make me ask twice. Ethan pulled the team up. He sat there with the lines in his hands. Hannah Reese was 19 years old, he said, and her people put her on a stage in Missouri with $4 and a valise, and she got up here, and she couldn't do it. That's all. Some folks can't. She'd wake in the night on account of the wind, and she'd cry and try not to let me hear it. And on the 9th day, she asked me if there was any way at all a person could get down off this mountain without going back through that town. Clara's throat closed. Why? Because she'd stood in that street the same as you, Ethan said, and Pruitt had made his remarks the same as he made 'em about you, and she'd sooner have walked to Missouri than let that street watch her fail. So what did you do? Drove her the long way round to Pueblo, 2.5 days over the canyon road, so she wouldn't have to go through Silver Bend. He shrugged one shoulder. Put her on the eastbound at 11 at night, paid her fare through to St. Joseph, and gave her $40, and told her to write when she got somewhere, and she did twice. She's married now. Fella runs a feed store in Hannibal. She named the girl Rose, which she'd no way of knowing what that'd do to a man, and I've never told her. Clara sat there with the salt in her lap. 11 at night, she said. Ma'am, you drove her 2.5 days out of your way, and paid her fare, and gave her $40, and let this entire county believe for 2 years that you'd done something to that girl. Her voice was rising, and she couldn't stop it. You let Harlan Pruitt say your name in that store with a look on his face for 2 years. Why in God's name did you never once tell anybody the truth? Because the truth was hers, Ethan said. Clara stared at him. If I'd told it, he said, then every soul in Silver Bend knows a 19-year-old girl came out here and couldn't stick it and went home. And that follows her. Letters get written, ma'am. Cousins hear things. She'd have carried it into her marriage, and into that feed store, and into that little girl's life. He clucked the team on. Wasn't worth it. Not for my good name. I ain't got much use for one anyhow. They went a 1/4 mile in silence. Mr. Walker, I want to say something, and I need you not to look at me while I say it. All right. Pruitt offered me $200 and a ticket east this morning, Clara said, to swear before a county judge that you took me off that street against my will and have kept me on this mountain in a condition no decent woman would choose. The lines went tight in his hands. He did what? You said you wouldn't look at me. I ain't looking at you, Ethan said, and he wasn't, and every muscle in his shoulders had gone to stone. I told him I'd take the salt and the coffee and the nails. Clara, that's the first time you've used it. Clara. He pulled the team up again, and he turned, and he looked at her, and it was not a look she had ever gotten from a man in her life. $200 is more money than you'll see in 3 years, and a ticket east, and a letter from a deacon. I'm aware. You could be in Kansas City by Sunday week. I'm aware of that too. Then why in the... His voice cracked clean in half, and he stopped and started again. Why didn't you take it? And Clara Whitmore, 31 years old of Ellsworth, Kansas, sat up on that wagon seat with 10 pounds of salt in her lap and said the truest thing she had ever said out loud. Because on the 14th of July, I was a debt by morning and a joke by supper time, she said. And I have been somebody's mistake in every room I've walked into since I was 19 years old. And then a man knelt down in the mud in front of 40 people and fixed my trunk. And I have thought about that hinge every single day, since Mr. Walker and I would not sell it for $200, and I would not sell it for $2,000. And if he'd offered me the whole of his store and the freight line with it, I would have told him the same thing I told him this morning, which is that I'll take the salt and the coffee and the nails. Ethan Walker looked at her. 20 a month ain't enough, he said hoarsely. "Oh, don't you dare." "It ain't. Don't you dare give me a raise right now, Ethan Walker. I will get down off this wagon and walk." And he laughed, out loud. The whole thing, all of it a real one, and it rolled down off him and startled the near horse into a jog, and Clara Whitmore put her hand over her mouth and looked away up the road so he wouldn't see what her face was doing. They got in at dark. Silas had supper, on which meant beans and a burnt pan and an apology. Ned Bailey's fever had broken, and he was sitting up demanding to be let downstairs. Jubal had counted the herd and come up 11 short, which was nothing, which was ordinary, which they would deal with in the morning. Clara was banking the stove at 10 o'clock when she heard the lean-to door drag open across the yard. Then footsteps, slow and heavier than usual, the sound of a man carrying something. The house door opened. Ethan Walker came in sideways with a small humpbacked trunk in his arms, leather-strapped dust an inch thick on the lid. A woman's initials worked in brass tacks on the front, and he set it down on the table she had scrubbed that morning, and he stood behind it with both hands on the lid and did not move. "Mr. Walker." "Ain't been opened since the 11th of October, 73, he said. "I know it. Everything my daddy ever signed is in the bottom of it, under her things." His hands were flat on the lid, and the knuckles had gone white. "The filing, the territorial receipt, all of it. 60 days, the man said, and 22 of 'em are gone." "Ethan, I have stood in front of this trunk," he said, "every August the 9th for 11 years, which was her birthday. And I have put my hand right here, and I have never once got it open, not one time, and I have called myself every name a man can call himself over it." Clara came around the table. "Then don't open it tonight." "Ain't got the luxury." "Then don't open it alone," she said, and she put her hand down on the lid beside his, not on top of it, not taking it just beside, and she left it there. "Because that's a different thing, and I think that's the thing you actually can't do, and I think you've known it for 11 years, and there hasn't been one solitary soul on this mountain to say it out loud to you." Ethan Walker's head went down. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes." "I'm going to ask you for something, and it ain't in your wages." "Ask it." "Lift the lid," he said, "because I can't, and I'll stand right here, and I ain't leaving the room." And Clara Whitmore put her fingers under the latch. The latch was stiff. It had rusted shut in 11 years of mountain weather, and Clara had to work it with her thumb twice before it gave, and when it gave, it made a small dry sound like a bird bone breaking. She lifted the lid. Ethan Walker did not look. He stood there with both hands still flat on the air where the lid had been, and his eyes on the far wall, breathing like a man carrying something up a grade. "Tell me what's in it," he said. "Ethan, tell me. Don't show me. Tell me." "All right." Clara's own voice wasn't steady, and she made no effort to pretend it was. "There's a dress on top, blue. Wool, good wool, with a mend at the elbow that somebody did by lamplight and did badly. That'd be me. She wouldn't let me quit till I finished it. There's a hairbrush, bone handle. There's a paper of hairpins and a thimble and—" Clara stopped. "Say it." "There's a boot," she said. "One boot. Child's." Ethan Walker's hands came down onto the table edge and gripped it. "He lost the other one at the ford in July," he said. "Kicked it off in the water and thought that was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anybody. Rose was fit to be tied, that was 40 cents of boot going down Bitter Creek." His mouth pulled. "I said leave it. I said a boy that laughs like that is worth 40 cents. She kept the one. I never knew why she kept the one." "Because it was his." "Yeah." Clara set it down on the table very gently, and she went back in, and under a folded shawl, she found an envelope with nothing written on it, and inside the envelope was a lock of hair tied with brown thread, and it was red, a red so bright after 11 years in the dark that it looked wet. She held it in her palm. "Ethan." "I said don't show me." "I'm not showing you," Clara said. "I'm telling you. It's still red." And Ethan Walker looked. He looked down into that trunk for the first time since the 11th of October, 1873, and what happened to him then was not loud, and it did not last long. His knees simply stopped agreeing to hold him, and he went down onto them beside his own kitchen table, like a man shot through the back, and he put his forehead against the edge of the wood, and his shoulders went. Clara Whitmore did not touch him. She had thought about it for 4 seconds, and decided that a man who has held a thing for 11 years has earned the right to set it down in private, even with somebody in the room, and that a hand on his back right then would be for her comfort and not for his. So she stood beside him, and she said quiet and steady, "I'm here. I ain't leaving the room." It took a while. When he got up, he did it slowly, and he did not apologize, which she was grateful for, because an apology would have made it something shameful, and it wasn't. "All right," he said. His voice was wrecked. "The papers." "Ethan." "The papers, Clara. 22 days gone." She went in past the shawl and the dress and the hairpins to the bottom of the trunk, and under everything there was an oilcloth packet tied with cord, and it was heavy, the way documents are heavy, and her hands shook untying it. "They're here," she said. "All of it. Give me a minute." She spread them on the table under the lamp. Deed of Homestead Entry, Josiah Walker, 1849. Territorial Survey Plat. 2 tax receipts. Bill of sale on a bull, which I'd not put in front of a judge unless you want him laughing. She turned a page over. "And this, Ethan. This is it. Statement of Appropriation and Diversion. Bitter Creek 160 inches. Josiah Walker, April the 2nd, 1849, recorded Territorial Office, Canyon City." Silas Bright had come in the door behind them somewhere in the last minute, and nobody had noticed, and he said, "Praise God," in a voice like gravel. "Wait," Clara said. "Ma'am, there's a second paper clip to it, and I don't like the look of it." "What is it?" She held it under the lamp and read it twice before she spoke, and when she spoke, the room got very cold. "It's a receipt," she said. 1867. Fremont County was cut, and the county seat opened its own book, and every territorial filing in the district had to be carried over into it. There was a fee, $2.50. She looked up. "Your father paid it, Ethan, on the 19th of May, 1867. He rode down, and he paid the $2.50, and he got a receipt, and he brought that receipt home, and he put it in a trunk with his good papers, and he died in 1870, believing his water was in the county book." "Then why ain't it in the book?" "Because of the name at the bottom of the receipt." Silas took a step forward. "Read it," Ethan said. "Received of Josiah Walker $2.50 for entry of the within filing upon the county record." Clara's thumb was over the signature. She moved it. H.G. Pruitt, Deputy Recorder. Nobody said anything for 4 full seconds. Then Silas Bright said, "Harlan," and it came out of him like a curse in church. "How was a clerk?" Clara said. 1867, before the store, before the freight line, before the water rights on the South Flat, and the pew at the front of the church. He was 29 years old, and he sat behind a counter at the county seat, and he took $2.50 off a rancher from Elk Ridge, and he wrote him a receipt, and then he never made the entry. "Could have been a mistake," Silas said without any conviction at all. "Man's busy papers go astray." "Silas." Clara laid the 2 documents side by side. "There's 160 inches of water on this mountain, and it don't go dry in August." He has known for 19 years exactly what he didn't write down. He has watched Josiah Walker die and Ethan Walker, bury a wife and a son, and he has sat on it, and he has waited for a summer when this ranch was weak enough and this man was alone enough. "And now he ain't alone," Silas said. Clara looked up. "No," she said. "Now he ain't." Ethan hadn't moved. "Boss." 19 years, Ethan said. "Boss. My daddy went down there in the spring of '67, and he came home and he told me at this table, I was 21. He told me, it's done, son. It's in the book, ain't nobody can take the creek now." His hands opened and closed. He said it like a man setting down a load. He'd worried on it 2 winters. And that was the last good year of his life, and he spent it easy, and it was a lie, and Harlan Pruitt wrote it. "Ethan." "I sold that man cattle for 4 years, Ethan said. I shook his hand. I let him cut me 3 cents at a time, and I called it the market being soft, and every single time he took my hand, he knew. He turned and picked up his hat. Clara got in front of the door. "No. Ma'am, move. It's 11 o'clock at night, and it's a day and a half to town, and you'd get there at noon tomorrow with a rifle and a signed receipt in your pocket, Clara said. And you'd be hanged by Michaelmas, and he'd own this creek by Christmas, and Ned Bailey would be looking for work with a bad leg. Now I have watched you do the right thing 4 times in 19 days. Ethan Walker and I will not stand here and watch you do the wrong one, because a dead man told you the truth as he understood it. Get out of my doorway. No, sir. Clara. No, sir. They stood there. Silas Bright said mildly from behind them, "She's right, boss." Ethan turned on him. "You want to be careful, Silas. I've been careful 30 years. Ain't got much to show." The old man scratched his jaw. "But she's right, and I'll say the rest of it too. You go down there tonight, and it's a shooting between 2 men, and everybody in that street tells it whichever way suits 'em. You take that receipt down there in daylight in front of a judge, and it ain't a shooting no more. It's a theft, by a deacon, out of a dead man's pocket." He put his hat on. "That's the one thing Harlan Pruitt can't survive, and you're fixing to hand him a way out of it because you're angry." Ethan stood in the middle of his kitchen with his hat in his hand. Then he put it back on the peg. 27th of September, he said. 58 days, Clara said. Then we go down on the 8th, not the 26th, the 8th of September, so if he pulls anything, we've still got room. Why not go Monday? Because he's got a man at the county seat, and I don't know which one, Ethan said, and if we walk in cold, he'll have 3 weeks to make that receipt disappear. We go down with witnesses. Somebody who was there in 67 behind that counter. Old Tom, Silas said. Tom Rennick was in Canyon City in 67. Tom Rennick was in Canyon City in 67-68 and part of 69 driving freight, and he's got a memory like a steel trap, and he's been mad at Harlan Pruitt since before there was a Silver Bend. Clara was already wrapping the 2 documents back in the oilcloth. Where do these go? Same place they've been. Ethan, that trunk is the first place he'd look. Then where? She thought about it for 3 seconds. Give them to me. Ma'am, I'm the cook, Clara said. I'm the fat woman he threw into the street, and everybody in the county knows it. Nobody on God's earth is going to search me. She was already going for her sewing tin. There's a hem in my gray dress, the width of my thumb, and it'll take an oilcloth packet folded twice, and I will sleep in that dress, and cook in that dress, and I will wear it into the county seat on the 8th of September, and if a man wants what's in it, he'll have to come through me and explain himself to a judge afterward. Silas Bright started laughing. Boss, he said, you paid $20 for that. 20 was wrong, Ethan said quietly. Do not, said Clara, without looking up from her needle. They came in the night on the 11th of August and dammed Bitter Creek 900 yards above the fence line. Jubal found it at 6 in the morning and rode back at a gallop and did not get off his horse. El arroyo está seco, boss, the creek's dry. How dry? You can walk it, there's mud. They rode up in a line of 5, and Clara went with them because nobody thought to tell her not to, and there were 4 men up there with shovels and a mule and half a wagon load of cut timber, and they had a good dam in and a spillway cut to run the water east into a draw that went down onto Pruitt's Flat. The man in charge was named Clyde Mercer, and he had a shotgun across his saddlebow and a paper in his shirt pocket, which he took out before anybody spoke. Morning, Walker. Mercer, I got a filing recorded at the county seat on the 6th of July, and a letter from the judge says the recorded claimant holds pending production. Mercer held the paper up. You ain't produced. Till you do that, water's ours to manage. That water's been running down that cut since before your daddy was weaned. Take it up with the book, Mercer said. Deke Rawls put his hand on his belt, and Silas said, Deke, in a voice like a hand on a dog's collar. 1,100 head, Ethan said. Mercer, you've run cattle. You know what 1,100 head do in August with no water. I know. Say it out loud then. Clyde Mercer's face did something uncomfortable. They walk, he said, till they don't. That's right? Ain't personal, Walker. It's a mile and a half of dead stock strung down a draw, Ethan said. It's personal to them. You want water, produce the filing. Mercer put the paper away. That's all the conversation I got. Man told me to say one more thing, and I'll say it, and then I'd be obliged if you'd ride on. Say it. Mercer looked at Clara. He says the offer stands till the 1st of September, he said. And it goes up to 300. Everything on that creek bank stopped. Clara felt 5 men not looking at her, which is a particular kind of loud. Mr. Mercer, she said. Ma'am, do you know what the offer is? No, ma'am, I don't ask. Then I'll tell you, and you can carry it back, and you can decide on the ride down what kind of man you're working for. Clara's voice carried clear across the dry rocks. He offered me $200 and a ticket east to swear before a county judge that this man kidnapped me out of Silver Bend and has kept me on this mountain in a condition no decent woman would choose. And now it's 300. And I'd like you to notice, sir, that the price went up the same week his lawyer found out I can read a ledger. Clyde Mercer sat his horse a long moment. That's so, he said. That's so. Huh. He gathered his reins. Well, that's a different piece of business than what I hired on for. Mercer, Ethan said. Walker, the dam's your job, and I ain't asking you to quit it. But you're going to be standing in a courtroom in September, and somebody's going to ask you what you saw up here. And I want you to remember, she said it in front of witnesses on the 11th of August, and I want you to remember, she said it before she knew whether it'd help her. They rode down. Nobody spoke till the horses were watered at the North Spring, which was already low, and then Silas said what all of them had been counting. 2 springs, 1,100 head, 22 days at the outside, and that's if it don't get hot. It'll get hot, Jubal said. We can push 500 head over to the Kettle Basin, Deke said. There's a seep. And the other 600. Deke didn't answer. Tear the dam out, Ned Bailey said from the wagon where he had been forbidden to be, and was anyway with his leg propped and his face still bad. It's 900 yards, 5 men 2 hours. And then it's a shooting, Silas said, which is exactly what he's paying Clyde Mercer $4 a day to stand up there and wait for. So we sit here and watch him die. We move stock and we hold our tempers 40 days, Ethan said. 40 days. Ned. That's my mother's rent, the boy said, and his voice broke on it, and he was 17 and had nearly died in a hayfield, and he was ashamed the second it was out of his mouth. I'm sorry, boss. I'm sorry I ain't got no call to. You've got every call, Ethan said. Sit down before that leg opens. That night, Clara went out to the woodpile with 2 cups of coffee, which had become a thing that happened without either of them arranging it, and Deke Rawls was standing there instead. He had his hat in his hands. Ma'am. Mr. Rawls, I need to tell you something, and I'd rather tell you than him, which makes me a coward, and I've thought about it all day, and I'm going to be a coward. He turned the hat around once. In April, Harlan Pruitt paid me $11. Clara set the cups down on the block. For what? For telling him things. Deke's jaw was working. Head count. What we shipped. When the boss came down. Whether he was low on cash. $11 over 4 months, ma'am, which ain't even good money, which is the part I can't get past. I sold this outfit for less than a month's wages, and I did it because I was sore about... He stopped. About nothing. About being 30 in a hand. When did you stop? Ma'am. You'd not be standing in front of me if you were still doing it. When did you stop? Deke Rawls looked at the ground. The 5th of this month, he said. In the hay. When you called for a belt and I got mine off and you told me to sit down and let that boy break my fingers. His voice went thick. He did too. He broke 2 of them. I never said. And I sat there in that hay holding Ned Bailey's hand, and I thought Pruitt asked me last month, was there anything on this ranch worth $100 to know? And what did you tell him? I told him no. Deke looked up. That was the truth in July. It ain't the truth now, is it, ma'am? Clara's hand went without meaning to the hem of her gray dress. No, she said. It ain't. I ain't asking you to keep it from him. I wasn't going to. Good. He put his hat on. Then I'll do it myself tonight, and he'll turn me off the place and I'll deserve it, and I'd take it as a kindness if you'd write my mother in Trinidad and tell her I quit honest. Mr. Rawls. Ma'am, you will tell him tonight, Clara said, and you will tell him every name and every date, And then you will get up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning like the rest of us. Because there are 600 head that need moving to Kettle Basin, and I have never in my life met a problem that was improved by one less pair of hands. Deke Rawls stood there. He might not see it that way. He buried Alma Doone's husband in January and never once told her what it cost him, Clara said. He drove a girl 2.5 days out of his way and let a county call him a monster for 2 years to keep her name clean. Mr. Rawls, I would bet $300. I don't have that. Ethan Walker sees it exactly that way and then never mentions it again as long as you live. She was wrong about one word of it. Ethan turned him off the place. Then he stood in the door with Deke 12 feet out in the dark, holding a horse, and he said, Rawls, boss, you're off my payroll and out of my house and you can bed in the hay shed. That's for the $11, and it ain't negotiable, and I don't want to hear another word on it. Yes, sir. Be at the corral at 4, Ethan said and shut the door. It got hot on the 17th. It got hot the way it does at 8,000 feet in a dry August, which is not the wet, suffocating heat of Kansas, but something thinner and meaner, and the grass on the south slopes went from green to the color of a paper bag in 9 days, and the North Spring dropped 4 inches, and they moved 600 head over the ridge into Kettle Basin in 3 brutal days, with 5 men and a boy who should not have been riding and rode anyway. Clara fed them at 4 in the morning and again at 9 at night, and carried water and rode fence and learned to cut a cow out of a bunch on a borrowed mare badly and then less badly. On the 19th, she found Ethan sitting on the corral rail at midnight, staring at nothing. You'll fall off. How long since you slept a whole night? Ma'am, what's the date? The 19th. Then 11 days, Ethan said. Ethan, there's a wind coming out of the southwest since Tuesday, he said. It's been 8 days without rain, and there's 100 acres of cured hay in the meadow. I couldn't get hauled because we were moving stock, and there's dry lightning up on the divide every afternoon at 4 o'clock. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. I'd give a year of my life for one good soaking rain, and I'd give the other 30 to know that dam ain't sitting between me and a fire. Clara went cold all over. You've been thinking about a fire. I've been thinking about nothing else since the 11th. Then say it to the men. They know. Say it anyway, Clara said. Ethan, a man who thinks alone at midnight on a fence rail, is a man doing arithmetic. Nobody can check. That's how you've done everything for 11 years, and it's how you nearly lost this ranch to 3 cents a head. Say it out loud in daylight to 5 people, and let us tell you where you're wrong. Ethan Walker turned his head and looked at her. You know what you are, he said. I've been told what I am by a great many people. You're the only person in 19 years, he said, who's ever told me I might be wrong and meant it kindly. The lightning came on the 21st at 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and it did not come with rain. Jubal saw the smoke, first off the southwest shoulder, and it was not much for the first 10 minutes, and it was everything by the 20th, because the wind that had been blowing 8 days was blowing still, and it was blowing uphill, and uphill was 100 acres of cured hay, and a hay shed, and a barn, and a house. How far? 1.5 miles. How fast? Silas Bright didn't answer, which was the answer. Then everybody moved at once. Ethan came out of his barn with an axe in each hand. Silas, Jubal, take the mower and the team and cut me a break at the fence line 40 foot wide, and don't you dare try for 50 and get caught out. Deke, boss, open the horse pasture and the corral, all of it, every gate on this place, and then get up to Kettle and turn that herd north. Alone. Take Ned. Boss's leg. Take Ned, he can ride and he can holler, and that's all it needs. Ethan swung up. Go. What about the meadow hay? Silas shouted. Let it burn. That's the whole winter feed. Let it burn, Ethan said. Cut the break at the fence and save the buildings, that's all we're doing today. That's all we can do. Ethan, Clara said. Ma'am, get in the house and shut the wall the creek, Clara said. He stopped with the reins in his fist. The creek's dry, he said. The creek's dry because there's a dam in it, Clara said. 900 yards above your fence, holding 10 days of August runoff, and there is a fire coming up this slope, and Clyde Mercer and 4 men are sitting up there right now with shovels watching it come at them. Silas Bright said very slowly, God Almighty. If that dam opens, Clara said, the water comes down the cut, and the cut runs across the bottom of that meadow, and it's wet ground for 40 yards on both sides by the time it reaches the hay. And if he don't open it, then it burns through the cut, and it don't stop till it's in your barn, Clara said. Ethan, he can't dynamite it. He cut a spillway east. It takes an hour with shovels to bring it down, and he'll not spend that hour to save your grass. He'll spend it saving his own men and his mule, and he'll ride down that draw, and by tomorrow morning it will be a tragedy that nobody could have prevented, and there won't be one thing in the county book about it. Ethan Walker looked up that slope for exactly 2 seconds. Silas, cut the brake. And you? 900 yards, Ethan said. Boss, cut the brake, Silas. Clara got a hand on his stirrup leather. You'll not get there before it does. I'll get there. Ethan. Clara. He looked down at her, and there was nothing in his face but arithmetic. 11 feet, he said. I have had 11 years of being 11 feet away. Let go of my stirrup. She let go. What happened over the next hour and 40 minutes, Clara Whitmore would tell in pieces for the rest of her life, and she would never once tell it in order, because it did not happen in order. She remembers Silas and Jubal running the mower across the fence line with the team half crazy in the harness and the smoke coming over them in waves. And she remembers the horses coming down out of the pasture through the open gates in a black rolling mass and going right past the house at a dead run. And she remembers standing in the yard with a wet sack in her hands, realizing that the wind had shifted 4 points east. 4 points east meant the break at the fence line was in the wrong place. 4 points east meant it was coming for the house. She remembers running, not to the fence line, into the house. She got the ledger off the shelf under the window, and she got the crock of buttermilk out of the cold box because she was not thinking clearly, and she stood in that kitchen for 1/2 of a second with the smoke coming under the door. Then she looked at the shelf over the stove. The blue enamel coffee pot was still on it, high up out of use and not thrown away. And she looked at the corner by the wood box where a hump-backed leather trunk sat with the initials worked in brass tacks. Clara Whitmore put the buttermilk down. She got that trunk under both arms. It was 90 pounds if it was one, and she was not a small woman, and she was not a strong one. And she got it up against her chest, and she could not see over it, and she walked it out that door and 40 yards down the slope to the wet ground below the spring and set it in the mud, and then she went back. She went back for the coffee pot. She was coming out of that door the second time with a blue enamel coffee pot in her 2 hands and her lungs full of smoke when she heard over everything the sound of water. It came down the cut at 4:25 in the afternoon. 10 days of August runoff came off that mountain in a wall, and it took out the spillway and the east bank and 100 yards of dry rock, and it went across the bottom of the meadow, and it soaked 40 yards on either side, and the fire came down to that wet line at 20 minutes to 5, and stood there and roared and did not cross. The hay burned. The hay shed burned. 11 miles of nothing much burned. The barn stood. The house stood. Clyde Mercer came off the mountain an hour later with his hat gone, and one eyebrow burned off, and he rode straight up to Clara in the yard and said before he even got down, "He's alive, ma'am. He's alive, but you'd best get a wagon." Where? 1/2 mile up the cut. He come up that draw at a run with an axe, and me and my boys stood there like fools and watched him start swinging at the face of it, and I never in my life. Mercer's voice went. "Ma'am, we all went in, all 5 of us. We took it apart with shovels, and it went out under us, and it took him off his feet, and he went 100 foot down that cut in the water with the timber. His head's fine, he's talking. It's his leg, and something in his side he can't hardly get a breath." "Is the leg open or closed?" "Ma'am." "Is there bone through the skin?" "Mr. Mercer, I need to know before I load a wagon." "No, ma'am. Bent bad, not through." Thank God. Clara was already moving. Jubal the buckboard and every blanket in the bunkhouse. Silas the whiskey behind the harness pegs know the whole bottle. "Mr. Mercer, get down off that horse, you'll fall off it." "Ma'am, I got to tell you the rest." "Tell me in the wagon." "I got to tell you now," Clyde Mercer said, "because in an hour I'm going to be a man who works for Harlan Pruitt again, and I ain't sure I'll have the nerve." Clara stopped. "Say it." "He knew about the lightning," Mercer said. "Not the fire. Ain't no man knows a fire's coming, but the lightning's been coming off that divide every afternoon at 4 o'clock for 11 days, and he knew it. And on Tuesday, I sent word down, asking should we pull the dam if it came on dry, and he sent word back. What did he say? Clyde Mercer looked at her. He said hold the water, he said. He said a burned-out man sells cheap. They brought Ethan Walker down at 7 in the evening on a buckboard with 4 men holding him and Clara sitting in the bed with his head in her lap, and he was gray as ash, and his breath was coming short and wrong, and he would not stop talking, which she took as the only good sign available. The brake did Silas get the brake cut? He got it cut and the wind moved and it didn't matter. The house. Standing. The barn. Standing Ethan. Everything standing but the hay and the hay shed and Mr. Mercer's eyebrow. He tried to laugh, and it turned into something that made all 4 men flinch. Don't do that again. Clara. Don't talk either. Clara. His hand came up and got hold of her wrist, and there was no strength in it at all, which frightened her more than the color of him. The trunk. Ethan. The house had smoke coming under the door, and I was a mile up that cut, and the wind was east, and I have laid in that water for an hour and a half, doing sums about a leather trunk in the corner by the wood box. His eyes were wet, and he was past caring who saw it. Tell me true, don't spare me. Is it gone? And Clara Whitmore put her hand flat on his chest to keep him from rising, and leaned down close so he'd hear her over the wagon. It's 40 yards below the spring sitting in the mud where I put it, she said. The dress and the hairbrush and the boot and the hair. Every bit of it. Ethan Walker made a sound. And Ethan, she said, your wife's coffee pot is on the kitchen table because I went back in for it, and I'd do it again, and don't you dare tell me I shouldn't have. His hand tightened on her wrist. Why? He said. Because a man can't take a thing down off a shelf if the shelf's burned, Clara said. And I have decided that you are going to take that pot down yourself one day in your own time and pour coffee out of it in your own kitchen. And I was not going to let Harlan Pruitt's arithmetic decide that you never got the chance. Ethan Walker turned his face against her hand and did not say anything for a long while. Then so quietly that only she heard it over the wheels. It's in your hem. What? The papers. His eyes were shut. It's the 21st of August. 17 days to the 8th of September, and I've got a leg bent double and 2 ribs stove in, and I ain't going to be sitting a horse by then, and he knows it by now, because Mercer'll tell him, because I'd not ask a man to lie about a thing like that. Clara went very still. Ethan, 60 days, he said, 27th of September, and there ain't a soul on this earth can carry that receipt into the county seat but you. They set his leg at 9 o'clock that night on the kitchen table, because the bed was too soft, and Clara would not have it any other way. Silas his shoulders. Jubal, you lie across his knee above the brake, and you do not move when he comes up off this table, because he will come up off this table. Mr. Rawls, hold that lamp steady, and if you're going to be sick after. Ma'am, I ain't going to be sick. You went white, Mr. Rawls. I'm holding the lamp. Ethan Walker had a folded strip of harness leather between his teeth, and he took it out to talk, which was the single most Ethan Walker thing she had ever seen a man do. Clara, don't. If it don't set right, it'll set right. If it don't set right, I want it took off clean, and I want you to be the one. Ethan Walker, so help me God. Her hands were on his shin, and her voice did not shake at all, which cost her something she would be paying back for weeks. You have got a bent bone and 2 stove ribs and a great deal of self-pity, and I have set 11 bones in my life and buried none of them. And if you say one more word about taking that leg off in front of these men, I will pour this whiskey on the floor and make you do it dry. Ned Bailey, propped in the corner where he'd refused to leave, laughed out loud. Ethan put the leather back in his teeth. She pulled it at 12 minutes past 9. He came up off that table exactly as she'd said he would, and Silas Bright put his whole 200 pounds on his shoulders, and Jubal lay across his thigh. And the sound Ethan Walker made was not a scream. It was worse than a scream. It was the low, tearing noise of a man who has spent 11 years teaching himself not to make noise and has run out of teaching. Then it was over, and the bone was where God had originally put it, and Clara had the splints on and the wrapping tight before her hands got the chance to start shaking. They carried him to the bed by the stove. He was out before they set him down. Clara went to the door and stood in it with her back to the room. "Ma'am," Silas said. "Give me a minute, Mr. Bright." "Take two," he said, and went out and took the others with him. And Deke Rawls set the lamp down and left the whiskey where she could reach it, and did not say anything, which was the kindest thing he could have done, and he knew it. The fever came up on the second day and stayed 4. She had seen fever before. She had nursed her father 11 months, and she knew the shape of it, the way a man's talk goes sideways, the way he answers questions nobody asked. But she was not prepared for what came out of Ethan Walker at 2 in the morning on the 23rd of August, with his hand locked around her wrist and his eyes wide open and seeing nothing. "Rose, the shoulder washes, and it don't look like it's washed." "Ethan? Give me the lines." "Rose, give me the lines." "Ethan, look at me." "He's got the one boot." His face crumpled like a boy's. "He kicked the other one in the creek and I said leave it. I said a boy that laughs like that is worth 40 cents. And now he's got the one boot. And how's he to walk anywhere with the one boot?" Clara Whitmore put her hand on his forehead and held it there. "He don't need it," she said. "He's not walking anywhere. He's sitting down." "He is. He's sitting down and he's talking about the horses," she said. "And he's telling somebody which one's mad at which other one. And he's got his shoes off entirely, and nobody minds." Ethan Walker's hand went loose on her wrist. "That'd be like him," he said, and slept. She sat there till 4. Then she got up and made breakfast for 5 men, because it was 4 o'clock, and there were 400 head on the north bench, and the water was still low, and Clara Whitmore had learned a long time ago in Kansas that grief keeps perfectly well in a covered dish. He came back on the 26th thin and clear-eyed and furious. "How long?" 5 days. 5? He tried to sit up and discovered his ribs. The herd. Kettle basins holding. The seeps down, but it's holding, and Jubal moved 140 head off the south slope Tuesday because the burn took the grays. "Who said to move 'em?" "I did." Ethan looked at her. "You did." "Mr. Bright agreed with me, if that helps your feelings." "It don't." "I didn't think it would," Clara said, and put the tray on his knees. He ate about half of it, which was the most she'd got into him in 5 days, and then he said without any warning at all, "You should have let me go up that cut and stay there." Clara set the cup down very carefully. "Say that again." "I mean it plain. I ain't feeling sorry for myself." His jaw was working. "I'm a man with a bad leg and a mortgage of 60 days and 32 of 'em spent, and there's 4 hands on this place drawing wages out of money I ain't got, because the hay burned, and I have laid here 5 days, being fed by a woman I hired to cook, and I have done sums. Clara and the sums say this outfit is worth more without me in it than with me." "That's the fever talking." "The fever's gone." "Then it's the 11 years talking," Clara said, "and I have got no patience for either one." "Clara, no." She pulled the chair around and sat down in it and looked him dead in the face. "You want to know what the sums say? I'll tell you, because I'm the one keeping the book. There are 4 men on this place, and not one of them has asked for wages since the 21st, and I did not have to ask them not to. Silas Bright has been sleeping in the barn so he could hear if you stopped breathing. Ned Bailey rode 22 miles on a leg he nearly lost because you told him he could holler, and that's all it needed, and he has told that story to everybody who'll stand still. And Deke Rawls, who sold you for $11, is out there right now on a horse at 4 in the morning with 2 broken fingers he never mentioned. That ain't the same as—" "I ain't finished." Her voice went up and she let it. "Clyde Mercer took a dam apart with his own hands for a man who wasn't paying him. And old Tom Rennick has been telling that street since the 14th of July that you're the only honest man on this mountain. And Alma Dunn has been sleeping through the night for 3 weeks on willow bark and hasn't the first idea what to do about it." "What's Alma Dunn got to do with anything?" "Nothing," Clara said. "Yet." She stood up and took the tray. "You have spent 11 years believing that the arithmetic comes out better without you in it, Ethan Walker, and you have never once let anybody check your figures. Well, I've checked them. You're wrong. You've been wrong since '73, and there wasn't a soul up here to tell you." She got to the door. "Clara." "What?" "You said Deke's got 2 broken fingers." "Since the 5th of August, in the hay." Ethan Walker lay back and put his forearm over his eyes. "Send him in," he said. "And then go on out of the room because whatever I say to that man ain't for anybody's ears but his." She never did find out what was said. Deke Rawls came out of that house 20 minutes later with his hat in his hands and his eyes red and got on a horse without a word, and at supper he sat down at the table instead of eating. Standing up by the door, and nobody remarked on it, and that was the whole of it. The women came up on the 28th. 6 of them in 2 wagons with Ruth Bailey driving the first one, and looking like she expected to be turned around at the gate. Clara came out drying her hands. "Mrs. Bailey. Miss Whitmore." Ruth Bailey was 40 and worn down to wire, and she got down off that wagon and stood there with her chin up. "I've brought 40 pounds of flour, a side of bacon, 2 hams, 11 dozen eggs, 4 crocks of beans, and my sister's quilting frame, which ain't for you. That's for the Kramer girl who's getting married, and I couldn't leave it in the yard." "Ma'am, I can't take—" "You will take it." The older woman's voice cracked straight down the middle. "You put 29 stitches in my son's leg with a sewing needle. He's 17. He's all I've got. My husband's been dead since 80, and that boy's wage is my rent, and every soul in that town told me that leg was coming off and to make my peace, and it did not come off. Mrs. Bailey, there's 4 more women in the second wagon, and 3 of them can't cook, and all 4 of them are coming anyway, because the men on this ranch have been feeding cattle and building fence on a burned-out place for a week, and somebody has got to do the wash." Ruth Bailey wiped her face with the back of her wrist hard once. "Now where do you want the flour?" Clara Whitmore stood in her own yard and could not speak for a moment. "Kitchen," she managed. "And ma'am, there's coffee on, and it's hot, and if any one of you says a word about not stopping, I will take it personal." They stayed 11 hours. They did 4 weeks of wash. They scrubbed a house that had had smoke under the door, and they put up 30 jars of choke cherry, and they laughed so loud in that kitchen that Silas Bright came in twice from the corral to see what was wrong, and Ethan Walker lay by the stove with his splinted leg, and listened to a sound that had not been made in that building since 1873, and said nothing at all about it to anybody ever. Alma Dunn came on the 30th alone in a rented buggy she had no business driving at 60 years old. Clara met her in the yard. "Mrs. Dunn." "Miss Whitmore." "How's the knee?" The old woman's mouth went tight, and then it went unsteady, and then she said, "It is the first summer in 2 years I have slept a night through, and I have not thanked you, and I have thought about that every one of those nights which I take to be the Lord being thorough." "Ma'am, you don't—" "Be quiet, girl, I've rehearsed this." Alma Dunn pulled a folded paper out of her bag and held it out. "There. That's what I came for. The thanking was extra." Clara opened it. It was a petition. It was 4 pages long, and it was drawn in a lawyer's hand, and it said in careful language that the undersigned residents of Silver Bend, being persons of good character and known to the court, did depose and affirm that one Clara Whitmore, a woman of doubtful history from the state of Kansas, had by her presence at the Walker Ranch created a public scandal, and that in the considered opinion of the undersigned, no proper reliance ought to be placed upon her word in any matter before the court. There were 31 signatures. 31, Clara said. There'd have been 46. Alma Dunn's chin came up. He started it Tuesday. He got 12 the first afternoon, and then Tom Rennick got up in the middle of the mercantile and asked Harlan Pruitt out loud whether a man who'd leave a woman in the street ought to be the one deciding who's got character, and after that, it went slow. Ruth Bailey called him a name in front of the church. I won't repeat it. I wrote it down. And you? I signed it, Alma Dunn said. Clara's stomach dropped. On Tuesday afternoon, first page, third name in ink in front of 9 people. The old woman's hands were shaking on her bag. I have sat on the Ladies' Aid for 19 years. Miss Whitmore and I have signed a great many things. Harlan Pruitt put in front of me, and I have never once read one of them all the way to the bottom, and I have never once been the first to sign or the last to leave. Then why are you here? Because you gave me the willow bark on a barrel top after what I said in that street, Alma Dunn said, and I have laid awake. No, that's the thing. I haven't laid awake. That's the entire trouble. I've slept like a child every night for 3 weeks on medicine, from a woman I called a burden in front of the Reverend, and a person can't do that forever without something in them giving way. She held out a second paper. That's my withdrawal. It's witnessed by Reverend Chase, who did not want to witness it, and by Tom Rennick, who enjoyed it far too much. It says my signature on that petition was obtained on a representation of fact I now know to be false, and that I withdraw it entire, and will say so in any court that'll have me. Clara took it. Mrs. Dunn, this'll cost you. It has already cost me. I resigned the aid Thursday. Alma Dunn got her chin back up. 19 years, and do you know what I found out, girl? Not one of them came to the house. Not one. I have poured tea for those women since Grant was president, and I sat in my own parlor Thursday evening entirely alone, and it come to me that I have spent my whole life being useful to people who would not walk 400 yards for me. Ma'am, don't. Alma Dun's voice went thin. Don't you be kind to me right now, I shall come apart, and I have got one more thing to say, and it is the important one. Say it. He's moved the hearing. Clara went cold. What? Judge Teague's got the fall assize at Pueblo, and he's cut his Fremont docket to clear it. The water matter's been set down for the 3rd of September. Alma Dunn's eyes were hard now. Not the 27th, the 3rd. It went up on the courthouse board Friday morning, and there was no notice sent out to this mountain, and Harlan Pruitt has known it since Wednesday, because Harlan Pruitt's sister's boy is the deputy recorder at Canyon City and has been for 6 years. Silas Bright said from behind them, Wendell. Wendell Pruitt. Alma Dunn agreed. 26 years old, no chin, and a bad habit at cards. Clara did the arithmetic, and it came out ugly. Today's the 30th. Yes. That's 4 days. Yes. It's 2 days to Canyon City with a wagon. Then you had better, said Alma Dunn, take a horse. Ethan Walker tried to get up that night and made it 11 inches off the mattress before his ribs put him back down, and Clara heard the sound and came in and stood over him and did not help him. Don't. I got to be there. You've got a green bone 4 days set and 2 ribs that ain't knit, and if you sit a horse 2 days, you will arrive at that courthouse with a fever and a bone gone crooked and no wind to talk with. She sat down on the edge of the bed. You'd be a spectacle, Ethan. You'd be exactly the thing he'd like the judge to see. Then a wagon. A wagon's 2.5 days over the canyon road, and we haven't got 2.5 days. Ethan Walker put both hands over his face. 19 years, he said. 19 years that man's had my daddy's $2.50 in his pocket, and I finally got the paper, and I can't carry it 2 feet. No, Clara said. You can't. Clara. I'm going. I know you're going, he said, and his voice broke on it, and he took his hands down, and there was nothing on that man's face but naked terror. That's the trouble. I've known since the wagon. I have laid here 9 days knowing it. Then say the rest. I don't know how to. Try. All right. Ethan Walker's hands closed on the blanket. Everybody goes. Clara didn't say anything. That's it. That's the whole of it. That's the entire sum I've been carrying, and it ain't a noble thought, and it ain't even a true one, and I've had it every day for 11 years. He was breathing wrong, and it wasn't the ribs. Rose went. Micah went. My daddy went. Hannah Reese went, and I put her on the train myself, and paid for it, and I have never once blamed her for it, and I would do it again tomorrow, and it still took something out of me. I never got back. Ethan. You'll go down that road, he said, and you will stand up in a courthouse and be looked at by 100 people who've read a paper with 31 names on it saying you ain't fit to be believed. And when it's done, win or lose. Clara, that's the part win or lose. There's a railhead at Canyon City, and there's an eastbound at 11 at night, and you'll have every reason God ever made. Clara Whitmore sat very still. Is that what you think of me? No. His voice was raw. That's what I think of me. Ain't nobody ever stayed, and I have got to be honest with you about what that's done, because you are fixing to ride off this mountain, and I would not have you go thinking I'm a calm man about it. I ain't calm. I have not been calm since the 11th of August. Then ask me. Ask you what? You know what? Ethan Walker looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. No, no, ma'am. He shook his head slowly. Not tonight, and not tomorrow morning at the gate, and don't you ask me to. Why not? Because you'd say yes. Clara's breath went out of her. And then you'd ride into that courthouse on the 3rd of September, Ethan said, and Harlan Pruitt would stand up and say, there she is. Gentlemen, the woman who's marrying the ranch. And every man in that room would look at you the way that street looked at you on the 14th of July. And I would rather lose the creek. His jaw set. I'd rather lose the creek, Clara, and I want you to hear me say it out loud, because it is the truest thing I've got. I would rather lose the water and the cattle and the whole of this mountain than have one more room full of people look at you like that on my account. Clara Whitmore put her face in her hands and cried for about 4 seconds and then stopped because she had things to do. All right, she said. All right. All right, Ethan Walker. You don't ask me tonight. She stood up and smoothed the gray dress with the thumb-wide hem. But you'll ask me, and I'll tell you when. They rode out at 4 in the morning on the 31st of August. Clara on Silas Bright's good mare and Deke Rawls and Jubal Cortez and old Tom Rennick, who had come up the mountain the evening before on a mule at 70 years old, and announced that he had been waiting 19 years to be a nuisance to Harlan Pruitt and would not be talked out of it. Ned Bailey wanted to come. Ethan told him to stay and mind the herd, and the boy argued for 4 minutes and lost, and then stood at the corral in the dark and said, "Ma'am, you tell that judge about my leg. If he asks, you tell him." "I will." "Tell him it was a sewing needle." "I'll tell him." They took the crossroads at Bitter Springs at 10 o'clock, and there was a man sitting a horse in the middle of it with a badge and a paper, and Clara knew before he opened his mouth. Miss Clara Whitmore. "That's me." "Deputy Sheriff Ansel Boyd, I've got an order out of Fremont County directing me to take into custody certain documents alleged removed from the Walker property." "Alleged by who?" Tom Rennick said. "And to secure the person of the said Clara Whitmore as a material witness pending appearance." Boyd was young, and he was not enjoying himself. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask what you're carrying." "A change of stockings and $11, ma'am." "Deputy," Clara said, "I want to be certain I have it right because I intend to repeat it. You've got an order to take documents off my person. Is there a woman with you?" Boyd's face went red. "No, ma'am." "Then who is proposing to do the searching?" "There's a matron at Canyon City." "Which is 30 miles, and the hearing's the 3rd, and you'd hold me 2 days while it was processed." Clara sat her mare very straight. "Mr. Boyd, how old are you?" 24, ma'am." "Who swore the complaint?" "Mr. Wendell Pruitt, ma'am, Deputy Recorder." "On whose information?" Deputy Ansel Boyd looked at the ground. "He didn't say." "He didn't say," Clara repeated. "So a county officer swore out a paper to have a woman stopped on a public road and searched by nobody in particular on information from a person he declined to name 4 days before his uncle's water case. And you rode out here at 10 in the morning to do it, and you've been sitting in this crossroad since dawn, and I would guess by your face that you have been sick about it the whole time." Nobody moved. "Ma'am," Boyd said, "I got an order." "You have," Clara agreed. "And I'll not ask you to tear it up because you'd be right not to, and because I don't want you ruined for me. So I'll make you a different offer." "Ma'am?" "Ride with us." Boyd blinked. "Ride with? You've got custody of my person and you can have it. I'll not go off this road and I'll not go out of your sight from here to the courthouse steps, and you can sit behind me the whole 30 miles with your hand on your gun if it makes the paper feel served." Clara leaned forward. "And when we get there, you will walk me into that clerk's office in front of God and everybody, and you will stand there, and you will watch what happens when I open my hand." "And the documents are on my person," Clara said, "and they will stay on my person, and if any man in this county wants them, he may come and take them off me in a public street in daylight, and I will let him, and then I will go and find a newspaper." Old Tom Rennick started laughing so hard he had to hold his saddle horn. Ansel Boyd sat there a long moment. Then he turned his horse in beside hers. "I'll ride behind," he said. "That's custody enough for me." "Deputy." "Ma'am, you'll want to be careful what you see in Canyon City," Clara said. "I have a feeling it'll be a considerable amount." They got in at 8 in the evening on the 1st of September, and Clara did not sleep and did not pretend to. At 9 the next morning, she walked into the Fremont County Recorder's office with a deputy sheriff at her shoulder, a 70-year-old freighter, 2 ranch hands, and 31 signatures against her name. Wendell Pruitt was behind the counter. He was 26, and he had no chin, and he went the color of dishwater when he saw the badge. "Boyd, what in May morning, Wendell," Boyd said. "This here's Miss Whitmore. She's in my custody. She'd like to look at a book." "She can't look at Mr. Pruitt." Clara set her hands on the counter. "The county record of water filings for the year 1867. It's a public book. I'll take it here at the counter in the light, and Deputy Boyd will stand where he can see both my hands and both of yours. That book's in the vault. Then it's a short walk." "There's a procedure, Mr. Pruitt," said old Tom Rennick. "I hauled freight into this town in 67 and 68, and I know what's in that vault and I know what ain't, and I'd be pleased to say so on that street out there at the top of my voice, and I have got a real fine voice for a man my age." Wendell Pruitt brought the book. Clara opened it to May of 1867 and read it 3 times, and it was not there. Bitter Creek was not there. Josiah Walker was not there. There was nothing between the 14th and the 22nd but other men's water. "It ain't in the book," Wendell said, and there was relief crawling all over him. "Like I said, it ain't in the book, and a receipt don't make a filing, and the judge'll say the same tomorrow." "You're right," Clara said. "I am. A receipt don't make a filing." She closed the book. "Now bring me the fee ledger." The room went quiet. "The what?" "The fee ledger," Clara said. "Every county office in this territory kept one because the money don't belong to the recorder. It belongs to the county, and it's got to be accounted quarterly to the commissioners." $2.50 came across that counter on the 19th of May, 1867, and a receipt was written out of a book with a stub in it. She leaned in. "Money leaves a longer trail than paper, Mr. Pruitt. It always has. I have kept books for 4 years for a rancher who was being cheated 3 cents at a time, and I found it in one afternoon." Wendell Pruitt did not move. "Bring the ledger," Boyd said. "Ansel, bring the ledger, Wendell." He brought it. It took Clara Whitmore 19 minutes, and Deputy Ansel Boyd stood at her shoulder the entire time and watched her do it, which was the single most important thing that happened in Fremont County that year. "There," she said. "Where? 19th of May. Fees received that day 7 entries. She put her finger on it. Total in the column $11.75. Now add the 7 entries yourself, Deputy. Take your time. Boyd added them. 9 1/4, he said. Add them again. $9.25. His head came up. That's $2.50 short. $2.50 received into that office on the 19th of May, 1867. Clara said, carried into the total so the quarterly would balance to the commissioners and never entered against any filing, because there wasn't any filing, because the man behind that counter took a rancher's money and wrote him a receipt and put the $2.50 in his own pocket and went home. She took the oilcloth packet out of her hem and laid it on the counter and unfolded it, and the receipt lay there in the light with the signature at the bottom of it. H.G. Pruitt, Deputy Recorder. Wendell Pruitt said, "Oh God." "Mr. Pruitt," Clara said, "I'd sit down." Judge Amos Teague was 61 years old and had been on the bench 11 years and had a face like a man who had heard every possible lie about water and was prepared to hear them all again. The courtroom was full. Clara had not expected that. She had expected 9 people and a clerk, and instead, there were 4 rows from Silver Bend, because word had gone down the valley, the way word does, and Ruth Bailey was in the 2nd row with her arms folded, and Reverend Chase was in the 3rd, looking like a man at his own trial, and Clyde Mercer was standing at the back with his hat in his hands and one eyebrow still not grown in, and Alma Dunn was in the front row alone in her good black, with her chin up and her back straight, and 31 former friends sitting nowhere near her. Harlan Pruitt rose first, and he was magnificent, and Clara made herself watch it because she wanted to remember exactly what it looked like when a man like that was still winning. How was reasonable? That was the terrible part. He never raised his voice. He spoke of 40 years of neighborly use and of the sad necessity of the book. He spoke of a man he'd known since boyhood who had suffered a hard fire and worse luck. He allowed that if the Walker filing existed, no one would rejoice more than himself. Then he said, "And I would ask the court to note respectfully who has come here to produce it." He turned around. A woman who arrived in Silver Bend 7 weeks ago and has resided since in a bachelor's house on an isolated ranch whose character has been the subject of a petition signed by 31 residents of that town, which I have here. "You may put that down, Mr. Pruitt," Judge Teague said. "Your Honor." "I said put it down. This is a water case." Teague looked over his spectacles. "Miss Whitmore, you have documents." "I do, sir." "Come forward." She came forward. Her hands were shaking and she let them. "Your Honor, I've got 4 papers. The homestead entry of Josiah Walker, 1849. The territorial statement of appropriation on Bitter Creek, 160 inches. April the 2nd, 1849, recorded at the territorial office at Canyon City. A receipt dated the 19th of May, 1867, for $2.50 for entry of that filing upon the county record. She laid them on the bench one at a time. "And the county fee ledger for the second quarter of 1867, which Deputy Sheriff Boyd brought from the vault this morning in my presence, and has not let out of his sight since." Behind her, the whole room heard Harlan Pruitt shift in his chair. "And what am I to make of the ledger, Miss Whitmore?" "That the money was taken, sir, and the entry was not made, and the sum was carried into the day's total anyway, so nobody would ever count it." Clara's voice was perfectly steady now. "Your Honor, I am not a lawyer, and I don't know what the law calls that. But I have kept a household book since I was 14, and I know what my mother would have called it." "And what's that?" "Theft off a dead man," Clara said, "and 19 years of letting his son believe it never happened." Judge Amos Teague read the receipt. Then he read it again. Then he looked up past Clara at the back of his own courtroom at a man he had known socially for 2 decades. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "is that your signature?" Harlan Pruitt stood up slowly. "Your Honor," he said, "I was a clerk in this office for 2 years, and I signed a great many receipts, and I could not possibly—" "Is that your signature?" The silence went on for 6 seconds. "It appears to be," Harlan Pruitt said. "Mr. Rennick," the judge said, "you've been standing at the back of my courtroom for 20 minutes, looking like a man with something to say." Old Tom Rennick came up the aisle. "Your Honor, I hauled freight into Canyon City from 66 to 69, and I stood at that counter maybe 200 times, and Harlan Pruitt sat behind it, and I'll say this, and then I'll set down." He turned and looked at Pruitt. "In August of 67, I paid that man $1.25 to record a lien on a wagon. 2 years later, I went to collect on it, and there wasn't no lien. He told me I must have misremembered. I was 38 years old, and I could not read, Your Honor, and I have carried that for 19 years, and I want it wrote down that Josiah Walker weren't the only one." Reverend Chase stood up in the 3rd row without being asked. "Your Honor," he said in a voice that was not steady at all. "The church building fund at Silver Bend has been held in Mr. Pruitt's account since 78, and there has never been an audit, and I have asked for one twice, and—" He stopped and started again. "And I would like to ask for one now in front of witnesses, so that I cannot be talked out of it a 3rd time." "Sit down, Reverend." "Your Honor, sit down. You'll get your audit." Judge Teague set the paper square. "Mr. Pruitt, you'll remain in this county. Mr. Wendell Pruitt is suspended from the office of Deputy Recorder as of this hour, and Deputy Boyd will see he don't go near that vault. The matter of the fee ledger goes to the district attorney, and it goes today." He turned the receipt over. "As to the water, the territorial filing of 1849 is produced, dated and prior. The failure of county entry is established as the act of the competing claimant's own hand. The Pruitt claim of the 6th of July is stricken, and the Walker right on Bitter Creek is confirmed in full, 160 inches, and any obstruction of that creek will be removed at the claimant's cost within 72 hours. He put his hand on the gavel and then did not use it. "Miss Whitmore, sir. There was a paper mentioned earlier with 31 names on it." "There was, sir." "I'm not going to read it," Judge Teague said. But this court has sat 11 years, and I've watched a great many people come in here and tell me who's fit to be believed, and I'd like the record to show that the only person in this room this morning who brought me a document that could be checked was the woman with no character." He hit the gavel. Clara Whitmore got about 4 feet toward the door before the second row stood up, and then the third, and she never did get all the way out under her own power, because Ruth Bailey got hold of her, and Alma Dunn got hold of her other arm, and there was a great deal of noise, and Jubal Cortez was saying something in Spanish very fast, and Deke Rawls was standing on a bench. Harlan Pruitt was still on his feet at the front alone with nobody within 8 feet of him on any side. He looked at her across the room. Clara looked back, and she found somewhat to her own surprise that there was nothing in her at all. No triumph, no anger, not even satisfaction. Just a tired woman, looking at a man who had once told her that nobody had ever spared her anything, and that it had nothing to do with him. She did not say a word to him. She had thought for 30 miles about what she would say, and when it came to it, she found she did not want to give him the last thing she had. She turned around and went out into the street. They rode into the ranch yard at 6:30 on the evening of the 4th of September. Ethan Walker was standing at the gate. He was standing on 2 crutches Silas had cut out of aspen, and he had no business being on his feet at all, and he had, Clara learned later, been out there since 2 o'clock in the afternoon and had refused 4 separate attempts to get him back in the house. Nobody spoke. Nobody got down. Clara rode up to the gate and stopped. "Well?" Ethan said. His voice was almost nothing. "There's an eastbound at 11 o'clock at night out of Canyon City." "There is." Judge Teague confirmed the Walker right on Bitter Creek in full, Clara said. 160 inches. The dam comes out inside 72 hours at Pruitt's cost. Wendell Pruitt suspended, and the fee ledger's gone to the district attorney, and Reverend Chase asked for an audit of the church fund in open court. Ethan Walker did not react to any of it. "And you came back," he said. "Ethan." "That's the only part I've been standing at this gate about since 2 o'clock, he said, "and I ain't going to pretend otherwise, and I don't care who's sitting on them horses behind you." Old Tom Rennick said, "Boss, we'll just—" "Stay where you are, Tom," Clara said. "Every one of you. Don't you dare move." She got down. She walked up to the gate, and she stood in front of a man on 2 crutches with a bent leg and 11 years on him, and she said, "Now, ma'am, you said you wouldn't ask me before the courthouse because a room full of people would look at me and say I was marrying the ranch." Clara's voice carried across that yard to every man in it. "Well, it's done. The water's confirmed. The creek's yours. Whether I stay or go, and there ain't one soul from here to Canyon City who can say I stood to gain a thing by it, because I already had it in my hand and I gave it to a judge instead." Ethan Walker's hands went white on the crutches. "Clara, so it's the 4th of September, she said. "And I told you I'd tell you when, and I'm telling you. Ask me now, Ethan, or I swear before God, I will get back on that horse and ride to Kansas out of pure temper." And Ethan Walker, who had not asked anybody for anything since October of 1873, said, "Marry me." "Say the rest of it." "There ain't any rest of it, that's the whole—" "There is," Clara said, "and you know exactly what it is, and you have been carrying it 11 years, and I want it out loud in this yard." Ethan Walker's face broke. "Don't go," he said. "No, sir. Don't, Clara, don't go. I have laid in that house 9 days, and I have done every sum a man can do, and there ain't one of them comes out right without you in it." The crutches were shaking. "I ain't asking you to be a wife to a ranch. I'm asking you to be here, in the morning. That's it. That's the whole sum. Don't go." Clara Whitmore took hold of both his hands where they gripped the crutches. "I came here because I hadn't any choice," she said. "You know that. 18 cents and a broken trunk and a cousin in Wichita. I want you to hear me say it because it's true, and I'll not build anything on a pretty lie. I know it. But I'm staying because on the 14th of July, a man knelt down in the mud in front of 40 people and fixed my hinge," she said. "And this is the first place in 31 years anybody counted me as a whole person instead of a figure they'd rather not have to carry." She put her hand flat on his chest. "Yes," she said. "Now sit down before you fall down." Ethan Walker did not sit down. He got one crutch under his arm and got his free hand around the back of her neck and put his forehead against hers, and stood there in his own gate in front of 5 men and a deputy sheriff and everybody he had left in the world. "Silas," he said without lifting his head. "Boss. Go in the house and take the blue pot down off the shelf." Silas Bright didn't move for a second. "Boss. Take it down," Ethan said, "and wash it out and put coffee on. There's too many people standing in this yard, and it's a cold evening, and somebody ought to have thought of it an hour ago." Silas Bright came out of that house 4 minutes later, carrying a blue enamel coffee pot in both hands, like it was a live thing. "Boss?" "Set it on the fire." "Boss, there's—" The old man's voice went. He cleared it savagely and started over. "There's a dead moth in the bottom of it, and about 11 years of dust, and I ain't sure it'll hold water." "Then wash it twice," Ethan said. They stood in that yard and drank coffee out of a pot that had not poured since October of 1873, and nobody made a speech about it, and Deputy Ansel Boyd drank 2 cups and said it was the worst coffee he had ever had in his life, and Clara said that was because Silas Bright had made it, and Silas said a man could only be expected to do so many miracles in one evening. Ned Bailey cried. He was 17, and he tried to do it behind the water trough, and everybody saw and nobody said a word. Deke Rawls waited until the others had drifted toward the bunkhouse. Then he came over with his hat in his hands, which was how he did everything now. "Boss?" "Rawls. I'll be moving on Sunday." Ethan looked at him. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me. I'm off the payroll, and I've been sleeping in the hay shed 6 weeks, and the hay shed burned, so I've been sleeping where the hay shed was." Deke's jaw worked. "I ain't complaining. I'd just as soon go before somebody has to say it out loud. Sit down. Boss. I've got one leg, Rawls, and I'll not stand here arguing on it. Sit." Deke sat on the water trough. "On the 5th of August, you got your belt off before Miss Whitmore finished asking for it," Ethan said. "On the 11th, you told her a thing that could have got you turned off, and you told it to her face instead of riding out in the night. On the 21st, you opened every gate on this place with a fire coming up the draw, and then went to Kettle Basin with a boy who couldn't hardly sit a horse. And on the 31st, you rode 30 miles to stand in a courthouse behind a woman you'd have laughed at in July." Ethan shifted his weight on the crutches. "You want to talk about $11. It ain't the money. It's that I took it." "I know what it is." Ethan's voice went quiet. "You want somebody to make you pay so you can quit carrying it. Well, I ain't going to. I done that to myself 11 years, and it don't work, and I'll not hand it to a man I like." Deke Rawls put his face in his hands. "You're back on wages as of the 1st of September, Ethan said, "which is 4 days ago, and it's 22 a month because you've been doing a foreman's work while Silas has been doing mine, and if you tell Silas I said that, I will deny it with my whole chest." "I heard that," Silas called from the barn. "Go to bed, Silas." Clyde Mercer brought the dam out himself. He came up on the 6th with 4 men and the same mule and a wagon, and he did it in a day and a half, and he did not send a bill to anybody. And when it was done, he came down to the house and stood in the yard with his hat off and his eyebrow still a ridge of pink. Walker. Mercer. "That's done. Creek's running. It'll run muddy about a week and then it'll clear." "Obliged." "Don't be." Mercer turned the hat around. "I ain't got work. Pruitt paid me off Tuesday, and there's 4 men behind me in the same fix, and 2 of them have got families in Silver Bend. You want a job? I want to say something first, and then you can decide about the job." Clyde Mercer looked at the ground and then made himself look up. "I sat on that creek 11 days. I watched your springs drop, and I did the arithmetic, same as your foreman did, and I knew inside of 4 days what was going to happen to your stock in August, and I stayed anyway at $4 a day because I've got a wife in Florence and no other offers." His voice went rough. "That fire didn't make me a good man, Walker. That fire just put the thing close enough to touch. I'd have sat there and let them cattle walk to nothing and told myself it was the book's doing. Nobody said anything." "There it is," Mercer said. "That's the whole of it. Now if you want to tell me to get off your place, I'll go, and I'll not hold it against you." Ethan looked at Clara. "That's not my say," Clara said. "It's half your say by Sunday." Then I'll spend the half I've got on this, Mr. Mercer. How many are in your crew? 4. And how many of them can swing an axe? All of them. Then here's what I know, Clara said. There is 100 acres of burned meadow and no hay shed and no winter feed. And it's the 6th of September, and the first snow up here comes when? Middle of October, Ethan said. Sometimes the first week. So there's 5 weeks to put a shed up and lay in feed for 1,100 head. And we haven't got the hay, and we haven't got the money to buy it. And we have got exactly 9 pairs of hands. She turned to Mercer. Sir, I don't care what you'd have done in August. I care what you'll do in September. Can you frame a shed? Clyde Mercer's mouth opened. Ma'am, I built the Florence schoolhouse. Then you're hired, Clara said, at $2 a day for you and $1.75 for your men, and I'll tell you plainly, it comes out of money we do not have, and if you'd rather have certainty, you'd best go find it somewhere else. I'll take it. You haven't asked when you'd be paid. No, ma'am, Mercer said. I ain't. The hay was the problem that nearly ended it, and it came the way the worst things always came in that country, which was politely on paper in the middle of an ordinary week. Jubal Cortez rode down to Silver Bend on the 11th with $41, everything in the box to buy hay off the Kramer place and the Dietrich place and anybody else with a surplus. He came back at 9 at night with the $41. There's no hay. There's hay in that valley, Ethan said. Kramer put up 200 ton. There was hay. Jubal was gray with dust and something worse. It's bought, all of it. Kramer, Dietrich, the Slade brothers, the church glebe, every stack from the ford to the county line. Bought on the 7th and the 8th cash money at $11 a ton when it's worth $6. Silas said, Who? Who do you think? Nobody moved. He can't feed 1,100 head, Deke said slowly. He ain't got 1,100 head. What in God's name does Harlan Pruitt want with 400 ton of hay? He don't want it, Clara said. They all looked at her. I wants us to want it. She sat down at the table and put both hands flat on it. He's lost the water. He's lost his nephew's office, and he's got a district attorney reading a fee ledger and a reverend counting a building fund. He cannot beat us in a courthouse anymore, so he has gone back to the only thing he's ever been good at, which is arithmetic. Her voice was very steady and very cold. He is going to starve this ranch to death over the winter, and then buy it in the spring at his own price, and there won't be one single thing in the county book about it, and every soul from here to Canyon City will say, the Walkers had a hard fire and worse luck. Then we sell stock, Silas said. Cut the herd. Ship 500 head in October and winter the rest. To who? Jubal said. He's got the freight contract. There's freighters in Canyon City. At what haul rate this late over the Canyon Road? Clara was already reaching for the ledger. Mr. Bright, I'll do the figures tonight, but I'll tell you what they'll say. If we ship 500 head in a hurry in October, the whole country will know we're shipping in a hurry, and we'll get 18 ahead, and we will spend most of it freighting them, and we'll come out of it with a smaller herd and the same problem in January. Ethan hadn't said anything. Boss, he bought that hay on the 7th, Ethan said. What of it? The judge ruled on the 3rd. He looked up. 4 days. It took Harlan Pruitt 4 days to lose a case he'd worked 19 years on and turn around with cash money in his hand for 400 ton of hay at near double the price. Where's the cash from? The room went quiet. He's got the store, Deke said. He's got the store, and he's got a freight line, and he's got a sister's boy suspended out of a county office, Ethan said. And he's got a courthouse full of people who watched a judge ask him if that was his signature. Now you tell me in that week which bank in Denver is lending Harlan Pruitt $4,000 cash. Clara's head came up slowly. Oh, she said. Ma'am, he didn't borrow it. She was already turning pages fast. Ethan, he didn't borrow it. He had it. He had it because he'd already borrowed it before on the 6th of July when he entered that claim. Say that again in English. A man doesn't file a claim on 160 inches of water and then sit on it, Clara said. He files it because he's already promised it to somebody. Mr. Pruitt has been buying up the South Flat for 4 years, and every acre of it is dry ground, and dry ground is worth $3, and watered ground is worth 30, and no bank in Denver lends against $3 land. She looked up. He borrowed against the creek, in July, before the hearing. He put 160 inches of Walker water down as collateral on a note, and on the 3rd of September, Judge Amos Teague struck that claim out of the county book. Silas Bright sat down on the edge of the wood box. "Then that note's called," he said. "That note is called," Clara agreed. "The minute a bank clerk in Denver reads the Fremont County record, and the only reason it ain't called yet is that nobody in Denver has read it, and it is the 11th of September, and the county's quarterly abstract goes up to the territorial office on the 1st of October. 19 days, Deke said. "He has got 19 days to turn $4,000 of hay into a ranch," Clara said, "because a ranch with water is collateral, and 400 ton of hay is not. He is not trying to starve us slowly. He is trying to make us sell him this place before the 1st of October, and he is doing it because if we don't, he is finished." Nobody breathed for a second. Then old Tom Rennick, who had come up for supper and stayed 4 days, because nobody had told him to go, started laughing until he had to hold on to the table. 19 days, he wheezed. 19 days. Lord God Almighty. That man's been squeezing this county since before the war, and he's got 19 days. Tom, I know it, I know it. The old man wiped his eyes. Only, ma'am, Miss Whitmore, do you understand what you just done? You didn't beat him in that courthouse. You beat him in July. He beat himself in July, and he's been walking around 8 weeks not knowing it. He knows it now, Ethan said. That's what the hay's for. So what do we do? Ned Bailey said. And Clara Whitmore closed the ledger. We do nothing, she said. Nothing. We do not sell. We do not panic. We do not ship in a hurry. And we do not send one single man down that road looking desperate. She stood up. Gentlemen, that man has spent 40 years making people move too fast. Every debt he's ever called, every price he's ever cut, every rumor he's ever put in a street. It's all the same trick, and the trick is to make you do something today that you'd never do in March. Well, we are going to be the first people in the history of Fremont County to simply stand still. Ma'am, that's fine, Silas said carefully, but standing still don't feed 1,100 head in February. No, Clara said. It doesn't. So we're going to do the other thing. What other thing? We're going to ask for help, she said, which in my experience is the hardest thing a proud man ever does, and the only thing that has ever once worked. Ethan Walker looked at her a long moment. Ma'am, he said, I've lived on this mountain 11 years. I'm aware. I have never asked that town for one thing. I'm aware of that too, Clara said. And I'd like you to consider, Ethan, that a great deal of what's gone wrong in your life since '73 has come out of exactly that sentence, said proudly by a good man in an empty house. Silas Bright rode down on the 12th with a letter Clara wrote and Ethan signed. It was not a plea. Clara had thought hard about that and had thrown 2 drafts in the stove. It was an offer, and it was 4 sentences long, and Tom Rennick read it out loud in the middle of the livery on a Friday afternoon with 11 men listening. Walkers on Elk Ridge had 160 inches of confirmed water and no winter feed. Any man in the valley who would cut and haul standing grass off the north bench and the kettle meadows, which had not burned, could keep half of what he cut, and Walker would take the other half, and Walker would furnish the mowers and the teams and the noon dinner. It was open to every man in the county. It was open to men who had signed a petition in August. That last sentence was Clara's, and Ethan had wanted it struck. It'll shame 'em, he said. It'll release them, Clara said. There is a great difference, and I have been on the receiving end of both. 9 men came on the 14th. 14 came on the 15th. By the 18th, there were 31 men and 4 boys on Elk Ridge and a mowing crew working the kettle meadows in 2 shifts, and Clara Whitmore was cooking for 40 with Ruth Bailey and 3 of the aid women who had never once come to Alma Dunn's house in her whole life and had discovered they liked working, and the noise on that ranch was a thing you could hear from the ford. Ethan Walker sat on the porch on a cane and directed a hay operation he could not walk out to and got angrier about it every day. And on the 19th, Clara found him trying to get up into a wagon box on a bad leg and told him if he tore that bone loose, she would let it heal, crooked out of spite. I ain't useless. Nobody said you were. There's 31 men out there cutting my grass, and I'm sat on a porch like a man with a broken leg who spent an hour and a half in a creek taking a dam apart with an axe so 100 acres wouldn't burn, Clara said. Ethan, do you know what they call this down there? Ruth Bailey told me Wednesday. I don't want to know. They call it the Walker haying. She put her hand on his shoulder. There's men down there who worked it who wouldn't have crossed the street to spit on you in June, and they're telling it in the livery, like they were always your friend, and every last one of them is a liar, and it does not matter one particle. Let them lie. In 4 years their children will believe it, and their children will be right, because they'll have grown up on a mountain where folks help. Ethan Walker sat back down on the porch. 22 men signed that petition and are cutting my hay, he said. 23. Kramer came Tuesday. Kramer sold Pruitt 200 ton. Kramer sold Pruitt 200 ton at $11 when it was worth $6, Clara said. And Kramer is not a fool and has spent 2 weeks working out that he took money for a thing that was meant to kill his neighbors, and he came up here Tuesday, and he could not look me in the face. Now what would you have me do with that man? Turn him around at the gate so he can go home and be ashamed for 30 years and teach his boys that it don't do any good to try? No, Ethan said. No, Clara agreed. So I gave him a scythe and a plate of beans, and I didn't say one word about it, and he'll cut grass up here till the snow comes, and that's how it's done. Harlan Pruitt came up the mountain alone on the 24th of September. He came in a buggy in his good coat, and he pulled up in that yard in the middle of the afternoon with 30 men in earshot. And the mowers stopped, and it went quiet. The way Silver Bend had gone quiet on the 14th of July, and Clara Whitmore came out of that house drying her hands on her apron, and understood that this was the last of it. Mr. Pruitt? Miss Whitmore. You'll want to state your business. There's 40 men expecting supper, and I've got beans on. I'd like a word with Walker. Mr. Walker's on the porch and his leg's bad and he ain't coming down, Clara said. And anything you've got to say to him, you may say in front of me because we're married Sunday, and that's an end of it. Something moved across Harlan Pruitt's face. Married, he said. Sunday. Reverend Chase, who I understand has had a great deal on his mind lately. I heard about the audit, Pruitt said. I imagine you did. $406, he said. Over 8 years, and every cent of it went back into that building fund by the 15th of the month every time. And there is not a man alive who can prove different because there ain't nothing to prove. He said it steadily. That's the truth. Not that it signifies. Reverend Chase has spent 19 days looking at me like I killed his dog. Mr. Pruitt, is there a purpose to this? $14,000, Harlan Pruitt said. Clara's hands went still on the apron. The store, the freight line, the 4 sections on the South Flat, the mercantile stock at inventory, and the hay, 400 ton, delivered to this yard at my cost. He got down out of the buggy. $14,000 payable over 9 years, 6%. You'd own Silver Bend inside of a decade. With what money? With the water, Pruitt said. You've got 160 inches confirmed by a court, and I've got 4 sections of dry ground touching it. And any bank in Denver will lend against that combination tomorrow morning, and you know it, because you're the one who worked out why they'd lend against it. And what do you get? I get out from under a note that's called on the 1st of October, he said, with my name still on a church pew and a train ticket to my sister's in Kansas City, instead of standing in a Canyon City courtroom in November, explaining a fee ledger to a district attorney. Clara looked at him a long moment. Ethan, she called. Did you hear it? I heard it, Ethan said from the porch. What do you say? I say it's a good offer, Ethan Walker said. And I say I'd not take a drink of water off that man if I was on fire. And I say it's your say as much as mine, and I'll stand by whatever you tell him. Clara turned back. No, she said. Miss Whitmore. No, Mr. Pruitt. Not for 14,000 and not for 40. She folded the towel over her arm. Because I have watched you do this for 2 months, and I know exactly what that offer is. It is one more day of Harlan Pruitt deciding what happens to everybody. And this time, it'd be us signing the paper, and in 9 years there'd be men in that valley saying the Walkers took the town when Pruitt was down. You'd hand us your name to carry. You'd walk onto a train with a clean coat and leave us wearing it. Harlan Pruitt stood in that yard. And then he did a thing that Clara Whitmore was never able to explain to anybody afterward, not to Ruth Bailey, and not to Alma Dunn, and not to her own husband. He laughed once and sat down on the step of his own buggy like an old man. "I wrote those letters myself," he said. "Mr. Pruitt, 9 of them. At my own table after the store was shut between 11 o'clock and 2 in the morning, and I never showed a one of them to a living soul." He was looking at the ground. "There wasn't any clerk wrote them. There wasn't any joke. My chest was bad that winter, and I laid in a room over a store I own outright, and there wasn't a soul in this world would have brought me a cup of water, and I meant every word I put down, and I have not meant anything since I was 29 years old." Clara did not say anything. She could not. "And then you got off that stage," Harlan Pruitt said, "and I looked at the street before I looked at you." Somewhere behind her, a mower's team shifted in the harness. Nobody else moved at all. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole of it. I had 2 seconds, and I looked at the street. And by the time I turned my head back around, I had already started saying it. And once a man like me starts saying a thing in front of 40 people, there ain't any way to stop. And I have been building on top of those 2 seconds ever since." He got up off the step. "You want to know why I fought so hard for a creek I could have bought honest? Because if I'd have got it, then the 14th of July would have been a shrewd man's play. And if I don't get it, it's just what it is." "And what is it?" Clara said. Harlan Pruitt looked at her. "It's the last time anybody was ever going to write me back," he said. Clara Whitmore stood in that yard with a dish towel over her arm and 40 men listening, and found she had nothing in her chest but a terrible flat grief and no place at all to put it. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. "Ma'am, I'm not going to forgive you. I want that plain. I have thought about it a good deal, and I've decided I'm not able, and I'm not obliged, and any woman who tells you different has not stood in that mud." "I never asked." "I ain't finished." She came down off the step. "But I'll tell you the only thing I've got, and then you may take it or leave it and go. That $2.50. "What?" "Josiah Walker's fee, 19th of May, 1867. Clara's voice was steady. "You'll pay it back. Not to us, Ethan wouldn't touch it. You'll pay it to the county in open court with the district attorney watching, and you'll write out on one sheet of paper exactly what you did in that office and why, and you'll sign it, and Tom Rennick's lien will go on the same sheet." "That'd convict me." "It'd sentence you," Clara said. "It won't convict you. You'd have done that yourself, and there is all the difference in the world, and every man in that valley will know which one it was." Harlan Pruitt stood there a long moment. "And what do I get for it?" "Nothing," Clara said. "That's what makes it worth something. There isn't a bargain in it, Mr. Pruitt. There's no ticket to Kansas City, and no pew, and no clean coat. There is only the one chance you've got left to be a man who did a true thing on purpose one time at 60 years old, with nothing in it for him." Harlan Pruitt got up into his buggy. He picked up the lines, and then he stopped. "He knelt down in that mud," he said without turning around. "Walker. I watched him out the window of my own store, and I thought that's a fool." His hands tightened. "And I have thought about it every night since, and I can't get it to come out that way anymore, and I would give the store and the freight line and every acre on that flat to be able to think it again." He drove out. Nobody in that yard said one word for a full minute. Then Silas Bright spat into the dirt and said, "Beans is burning, ma'am," and 40 men went back to work, and that was the last time Harlan Pruitt ever set foot on Elk Ridge. He filed the statement on the 9th of October. It ran to 2 pages, and it named 11 people, and Tom Rennick's wagon lien was the 4th of them, and the old man had it read to him twice, and then had it read to him a 3rd time in the livery with the doors open. The note was called on the 2nd. The Denver Bank took the freight line and the 4 sections. The Mercantile was sold in November to a man from Pueblo who kept the same shelves and better prices. Harlan Pruitt was bound over and pled, and Judge Amos Teague, who had known him socially for 2 decades and did not once look at him, gave him 2 years at Canyon City, and said from the bench that the court had considered the voluntary statement and had reduced the term on account of it, and that he wished to state for the record that a man who confesses without a bargain is a rarer thing in that courtroom than an honest water case. He served 14 months. He went to his sister in Kansas City after, and he did not come back, and he wrote to Reverend Chase twice a year until he died. And Clara Whitmore read those letters, and never once answered them, and never once threw one away. They were married on the 28th of September 1884 in the yard, because the church would not hold the people who came, and because Ethan Walker could not stand up long enough to get down the aisle of anything. Alma Dunn did the flowers. She had not spoken to 11 of the women who came, and she stood at the front in her good black and dared any one of them to say a word to her. And at the end of it, Ruth Bailey put an arm around her, and Alma Dunn cried in front of the entire Ladies' Aid, which she had sworn on her husband's grave she would never do. Ned Bailey stood up with Ethan, because Silas Bright flatly refused on the grounds that he would embarrass everybody, and then stood 4 feet away and embarrassed everybody anyway. Clara wore the gray dress. She had 2 better ones by then. Ruth Bailey and the Kramer girl had made her a blue one out of good wool and would not take payment, and she wore the gray with the thumb-wide hem. And when Alma Dunn asked her why in heaven's name, Clara said, "Because I carried a dead man's justice 30 miles in this hem, ma'am, and I'll not put it in a trunk." And Alma Dunn said that was the single most vulgar and magnificent reason she had ever heard. Ethan Walker got through the whole thing on a cane without saying much, which surprised nobody. Then Reverend Chase asked if there was anything he wished to say, which was not in the order of service, and which Clara found out afterward Ruth Bailey had put him up to. Ethan stood there a while. "I ain't good at this," he said. "We know it, boss," Deke Rawls said, and got elbowed by 3 people. On the 11th of October, 73, I was 11 foot away from my wife and my boy, and I did not get there in time. The yard went absolutely silent. And I have spent 11 years believing that a man who don't get there in time has got no business standing close to anybody on account of he'll only prove it again. He shifted his weight on the cane. On the 14th of July, a woman got off a stage in a street and I was 50 foot away across the road, and I had bought my nails and my horses was watered, and I could have drove out of that town and never known one thing about it. His voice was not steady. And I want it said in front of all of you that I did not cross that street to be a good man. I crossed it because I could not stand there and be 11 foot away one more time in my life. Clara had her hand over her mouth. "That's the whole of what I've got," Ethan Walker said. "I ain't a man who gets there in time. I'm a man who's going to keep crossing the street. And Clara, if you'll have that, it's yours, and there ain't a day left in me that ain't." They came back from the barn at 11 o'clock that night, married, and Clara stopped in the middle of the kitchen. The rifle was still where it had been since the 15th of July, standing in the corner by the loft ladder on her side of the room, because neither of them had ever once mentioned moving it. She picked it up. "Ethan. Do you remember what you said to me the first night I was in this house?" Ethan Walker's face did a complicated thing. "Every word," he said. "I've thought about it a considerable amount." "You put your only gun on the floor and slid it to my feet." "I did, and I have slept 11 weeks with it beside me, and never once needed it," Clara said, "and I would like to put it back on the pegs, and I would like you to be the one that hangs it, and I want you to understand that I am not doing it because I'm your wife, and it's your house." "Then why?" "Because you were right to do it," she said. "And a thing that was right once don't have to go on being necessary forever. That's all. That's the whole of what I know about people." Ethan Walker, after 31 years, that most of what we carry was right once. He took the rifle and hung it on the pegs. Then he turned around and he was crying, and he did not try to hide it, which was the newest thing about him, and the one that took her the longest to get used to. "Take off everything," Clara said. Ethan Walker made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else entirely. "Ma'am. Your coat, your boots, and that hat," she said, and her own eyes were streaming, because they are soaked through, Mr. Walker, and it's 41 degrees, and I've buried a man who came off this ridge wet in September. August. I've improved it. The hay came in on the 2nd of October, a day and a half before the first snow, and there was 310 ton of it in a new shed. Clyde Mercer framed in 19 days, and it was 11 tons short of what they needed, and they fed through to April anyway, because the winter was mild, and because Jubal Cortez had been right about the Kettle Basin seep. Nobody left. That was the thing Clara never got over. Silas Bright stayed. Jubal stayed. Deke Rawls stayed and married the Kramer girl in the spring in that same yard, and Clara did the flowers, and Alma Dunn did the cake, and told everybody it was the worst cake she had ever made, and was fishing so obviously that Tom Rennick told her so out loud. Ned Bailey stayed and brought his mother up in November to keep the house through the winter, and Ruth Bailey never went back down, and by February she was running the kitchen and telling Clara to sit down about 9 times a day, which Clara resented bitterly and obeyed every time. Clyde Mercer stayed. He built a hay shed and then a bunkhouse and then a second room off the back of the house with a window facing east, and he did not ask what the room was for, and Ethan did not tell him, and both of them knew. They came up the mountain that winter, and then the next summer, and then it was simply the thing people did. They came because Clara Whitmore could set a bone and pull a tooth and knew what to do about croup at 2 in the morning, and because she never once took money for it, and never once refused anybody, including 2 of the women who had signed a petition. She delivered 11 babies in her first 18 months on Elk Ridge and lost one, a Dietrich boy who came too early, and she sat up with that mother 4 nights and did not eat, and Ethan did not once ask her to come to bed. They came because there was a table in that kitchen that seated 9, and Ruth Bailey would not let a soul leave it hungry. And they came though nobody ever said it out loud because of what had happened in that street on the 14th of July, and because everybody in that valley had been standing on one side of it or the other, and coming up the mountain was how a man got to change which side he'd been on without ever having to say so. By the summer of 1885, there was a school in the front room, 3 mornings a week. 9 children taught by Clara, because the nearest school was 11 miles, and Alma Dunn had said at the aid, which she had been asked back onto, and had accepted after 11 days of letting them ask, that she did not see why a woman who could read a county fee ledger could not teach a child his letters. They stopped calling him the Silent Mountain Cowboy sometime that year. Nobody decided to. It just went out of use the way words do, and what came in behind it was that people said, "Up at Walker's," the way you'd say a place, not a man. On the 9th of August, 1885, Rose's birthday, which Clara had marked in the ledger her first month, and never once mentioned, Ethan Walker came in from the corral at noon, and found his wife sitting on the floor by the wood box with her hand on the doorframe. "Clara, I'm all right." "You're on the floor." "I'm on the floor because I sat down," she said, "and I sat down because I have been standing since 4 o'clock, and I would appreciate it if you'd stop looking at me like a horse that's gone lame." Ethan lowered himself down beside her, which took a while, because that leg never did come back all the way, and never would. "You've got your hand on his marks." "I do." "You've done that 4 times this week." Clara Whitmore turned and looked at her husband. "Ethan," she said. It'd be about the end of March. Ethan Walker did not say anything at all for 11 seconds. Then he said, "March," in a voice with nothing left in it. "About the end. That's Ruth's count and mine, and we agree, which she says is a bad sign for you, because we're never wrong twice." He put his hand over his mouth. "I need to say the next part fast," Clara said, "because I've been 3 weeks working out how, and if I go slow, I'll not manage. Ethan, I am not bringing anybody into this house to replace a soul in it. Not one. I'll not have that boy's marks scraped off this frame, and I'll not have that pot put back on a shelf. And if there is ever a day when you can't look at a red-headed child in this kitchen, you'll tell me, and we will deal with it, and I will not think less of you. Not one particle, not ever." Ethan Walker took his hand down. "Give me the pencil," he said. "What? There's a pencil in the tin on the shelf. Give it here." She gave it to him. He got up on his good knee, and he braced against the doorframe, and under Micah 4YR Aug, 1873. He wrote in that small, cramped, slow hand of a man who could write, but did not enjoy it, March 1886. Then he sat back down on the floor next to his wife. "There," he said. "Now it's a list." Clara Whitmore put her head on his shoulder and cried until she had to stop because she couldn't breathe, and Ethan Walker held on to her with one arm and looked at that doorframe and did not say anything for a long time. "He'd not have minded," he said at last, No. How was 4? He'd have minded about the horses. Ethan wiped his face with the back of his wrist. He'd have wanted to know which one it was getting, and whether it was mad at the others, and he'd have talked your ear off about it, and stuttered on every W, and made you say whether 3 times just to be sure. Then we'll tell it that, Clara said. About him. From the start. So it's not a sad story it finds out later. Yeah. Ethan? Say the thing you're not saying. Ethan Walker looked at the pot on the shelf over the stove, which had been washed twice, and poured coffee for 400 people in 11 months, and had a chip in the rim now from Ned Bailey, who had apologized about it 40 times. I was going to die up here, he said. That's the thing. That's what I ain't said, and I'll say it once. On the 14th of July, I come down that road for nails, and my whole plan for my life was to go on doing that about 40 more years, and then not come down anymore, and somebody'd notice in a month, and that'd be it. That was the entire arrangement. His hand tightened on hers. And there was a woman standing in the mud with her mother's spoon in her hand, and 40 people laughing at her. And I want you to know, Clara, that when I crossed that street, I was not saving anybody. I know it. They all think I'd done a kindness. I know exactly what you did, Clara said, because I was doing the same thing. I picked that spoon up out of the mud in front of the whole town, and I want you to understand that I did not do that because I was strong. I did it because it was the only thing left in this world that was still mine, and I was not going to leave it in a street for those people. Ethan Walker laughed wetly. Some pair, he said. Some pair, Clara agreed. 2 people that everybody had already finished with. She sat up and wiped her face with her apron, the way she did everything briskly and without ceremony, and she looked around that kitchen at the table that seated 9 and the pot on the shelf, and the pencil marks with a new line under them, and the rifle on the pegs where it belonged. They were wrong about the count, she said. Ma'am, that's all it ever was, Ethan. That's the whole of it, and I've had a year to think about it, and I can't find any more in it than that. Clara Whitmore put her hand flat on her husband's chest. There wasn't a thing wrong with me, and there wasn't a thing wrong with you. Everybody down there was just reading the wrong figure off the wrong ledger, and it took a man kneeling in the mud over a busted hinge to go and check the arithmetic. Ethan kissed the top of her head. Best trade I ever made, he said. $20 a month. 20 was wrong. Don't you dare, said Clara Walker. Start that again.